like to convene the regular meeting of the City Council for January the 11th, 2011. We've got 1/11/11 for the date of this meeting. And with that, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, do you have a closed session report for us?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The council met in closed session to discuss the matters listed on its agenda. And with respect to one matter, all except for one matter, there's no reportable action. With respect to the one matter that there's reportable action, that's the Morningside zoning agreement threat of litigation. The council moved 7-0 to authorize the defense of the matter should it be filed, but instructed staff to keep the lines of communications open since it would prefer to resolve the case if it can, since it would not like to litigate with a citizens group from the city.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to proceed with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Council Member Hill, and if you would stand and remain standing for the invocation by Mr. Carpenter, that would be good.
Please join me in saluting our great country. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in the invocation. Heavenly Father, we come before you this evening. We thank you for this fair city and the privilege of working and living and serving in this community. We thank you for the natural resources, for the beauty that we have here, and for these citizens and public servants that have come together tonight. We ask that you would give us wisdom, patience with one another, insight, and help us to just guide this city towards the future. We thank you for this time, and we pray it in your name. Amen.
So we're ready for presentations. It's with the greatest of pleasure that we call for the Junior Lifeguard of the Year presentation.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, it's with great pleasure that I'm here tonight to present to you Mr. Christopher Hughes. Mr. Christopher Hughes is our Junior Lifeguard of the Year. Christopher?
Sir, could you please state your name?
My name is Fire Chief Mike Morgan.
There you go.
A little bit about Christopher. For exemplifying the core values of a junior lifeguard, being a respectful and responsible junior lifeguard, and representing the junior lifeguard program, the fire department, and the city of Newport Beach to the best of his ability. A junior lifeguard who set an example with his dedication and determination to successfully complete each and every task or event, no matter how challenging. Christopher was a 9-year-old this past summer. His greatest accomplishment was completing the Grey Lund Ironman, or is it Grey Lunde? I don't know, Lunde. The Grey Lunde Ironman event begins at the River Jetty at Tower 74, and participants run to the Newport Pier, swim around the Buddy's Buoy twice, run to the Balboa Pier, swim around Renee's Buoy twice. I get dizzy just thinking about it. Run to the street and back to finish at the Balboa Pier. Only a handful of 9-year-old junior lifeguards attempt this event each year. This year's event was made extremely difficult when water temperatures dipped into the low 50s. Many of the junior lifeguards could not finish the event. Christopher pushed through the grueling water temperature and finished with a smile on his face. When Christopher is not a junior lifeguard, he is a student and an athlete. Christopher is bilingual in French and is a 4th grader at the Lycée International de Los Angeles, Orange County campus, a French immersion school. He is a member of the 10 and under Anteater water polo team and swims for the Newport Hills swim team. He is studying guitar and piano and is in the training division of the All-American Boys Chorus. He was a semifinalist in the 2010 Inland Icon Youth Vocal Competition. The Newport Beach Lifeguards are honored to select Christopher Hughes as the 2010 Junior Lifeguard of the Year.
Christopher, I'll come down and we can take a picture.
To commemorate this moment, we have a certificate of achievement that we will ask the mayor to present to Mr. Hughes. Go ahead and let's present the
Hold your certificate and we'll take a photo. Very good.
Just a quick couple of words to, while the mayor reseats himself. We also have the instructors of the junior lifeguard program that were responsible for Christopher this summer, Jenna and Jeff, and of course Rob Williams and Brett Anderson and Jim Turner from our permanent lifeguard program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. I did attend the junior lifeguard graduation ceremony this year down at Balboa Pier, and I'd have to say it's just a fabulous event. It's a great program, and I think one of the best programs that the city offers. So thanks to all the staff and the lifeguards for running such a great program as well. Madam Clerk, can you read the notice to the public, please?
The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the council. Speakers must limit comments to 5 minutes on agenda items. The council has a discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn cell phones off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for council announcements or matters which council members would like placed on a future agenda for discussion, action, or report.
Okay, council announcements. Councilmember Daigle.
Yes, I attended this morning the swearing in of Supervisor John Morlock, and Councilman Hill was there as well, and our city aviation consultant Tom Edwards, and the Newport citizens that I saw there were also quite involved with our airport activities. Nancy Alston from Airfare, Melinda Seeley from Airfare, Bob Hawkins from AWG, and Gary Hill from Santa Ana Heights PAC. And I would just underscore that that's one of the, probably the most important issue that Supervisor Morlock is going to be working on the next year is our airport. So it was really great that we had a show of support for Supervisor Morlock, and we're really doing what we can to continue that, to develop that relationship. And he's been a tremendous advocate so far for Newport Beach, and we certainly hope that continues. So thank you.
Councilmember Curry.
Thank you. As most of you know, February 6th will mark the 100th centennial of the birth of President Ronald Reagan. There have been events all over the country. You saw the Rose Parade float. You saw the stamp that was done. Here in Newport Beach, we have two events coming up, or two things, one of which is on January 27th at the Lido Theater. We'll have the world premiere of the movie Ronald Reagan, An American Journey. That will be a fundraiser, but it will also be a great movie about the life of this great American. The director of the movie, Robert Klein, will be present. And at the same time, we'll also be showing the first maquette of a memorial that private donations raised through the city will be solicited for to remember President Reagan here in Newport Beach. And later in the consent calendar, we'll establish an account to receive those donations. But I want to remind everybody about this movie, Ronald Reagan, An American Journey, January 27th at the Lido Theater in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
No report.
Mr. Rosansky.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilmember Gardner.
Nothing.
Okay, well, it's been a while since we've had a, did I ask you, Councilmember Selledge? No. I skipped you. Did you have anything to announce?
I do. Thank you. Actually, mine isn't an announcement. It's a request for a future agenda item. 443 Harbor Island Drive. It's a home that's been sitting uncompleted for 4 years. I'd like to have it come back to council for consideration for the city to take action similar to what we did on the buildings on Coast Highway at Dover Drive and have the building demolished. It's been sitting there for 4 years. It's different than some of the other homes we have in town that are unfinished. This one, I understand, is in bankruptcy, so it's really caught in a bureaucratic mess, if I understand it correctly, between the bank and the bankruptcy court. And the people on Linda Isle, Harbor Island Drive, and Promontory Bay, I believe, are fed up with the house being there. It's unsightly, it's unsafe, it's an attractive nuisance to kids coming in the property, and I think it's time that we did something about it. So whether it's a study session or a closed agenda, you guys decide what's appropriate, but I think it's time that we did something about it.
Thank you. Well, it's been a while since we've had a council meeting, and time has passed and things have happened, and we've got a few announcements about things coming up, so I'll take a few minutes here. We had another successful running of the boat parade in the harbor. I did have the pleasure of doing some media interviews, including the news agency for the People's Republic of China. And so I'm presuming that Newport Beach and perhaps this mayor may be the best-known city and mayor in the entire world at some point. With regard to the boat parade, I wanted people to know that there is an awards ceremony. It's a charity fundraising dinner scheduled for January the 28th at the Balboa Bay Club, starting at 6 p.m. for cocktails and 7:30 for dinner. It's a silent and live auction, and it's for the benefit of the boat parade. All of the net proceeds go to help make another successful event next year. With regard to the study session that we just had today regarding the Lido Marina Village, the Greater Village land use, I think we had a very lively and successful study session, resolving most of the issues associated with that. Speak Up Newport plans an event tomorrow evening. Beginning at 6 p.m., we will do a recap of the Lido Marina Village study session material and the conclusions that were drawn from that. I invite anyone who wishes to please attend that. That will be taped, and so it'll be available for replay as well. That is at the Newport Beach Yacht Club, which is at the entrance to Balboa Island, just as you go down Jamboree. That begins at 6 o'clock. Cocktails at 5:30 and the presentation at 6 o'clock. I also had the pleasure of attending the Southern California Yachting Association annual installation dinner on Saturday night. That was quite an event. It consists of 90 yacht clubs all across Southern California. And that's an important group because they schedule a lot of events and make sure that we don't have conflicts for a lot of these yacht racing events. And so that was a nice event. With regard to things coming up, Restaurant Week, I want to make sure everyone knows that Restaurant Week begins on January the 22nd, runs through the 28th. It's a great opportunity to experience restaurants all around the city. Maybe do a little experimenting, places that you haven't gone, and to get a good deal in the process. So encourage everyone, please take advantage of Restaurant Week this year. With regard to an important meeting that the city has organized, every year the City Council engages in a priority-setting session. It's off-site. I'm not sure that we've identified the venue.
Oasis.
It will be at the new Oasis Center this year on Saturday, February the 5th, beginning at approximately 8 a.m.
8:30.
8:30, okay. And this is an important exercise that Council tries to coalesce around the objectives that it wants to achieve for the coming year. We really need and want public input into that discussion, and so I would hope that as many citizens as possible would attend that session at Oasis on February the 5th, beginning at 8:30 in the morning. Lastly, I do intend to start a Facebook page for the mayor of Newport Beach. I do so with trepidation. I expect to have that up and running for the next council meeting, so be on the lookout. I look forward to all of the friends and fans that I'm going to have over the course of the next year. And I'm not a tweeter, so there won't be any twittering going on here. I do also, though, plan to continue a program started by Mayor Curry last year, and that is the Meet the Mayor sessions. I'm working with the city staff right now to identify 7 or 8 Saturdays or other dates during the year where I'll just be available to meet with anyone who wishes at various venues around the city. I thought that was a good program, and I intend to continue that. So with that, Madam Clerk, we need to do consent calendar.
All matters listed under consent calendar, items 1 through 22, and supplemental item S27, are considered by the City Council to be routine and will all be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. The City Council members have received detailed staff reports on each of the items recommending an action. There will be no separate discussion of these items prior to the time the Council votes on the motion unless members of the Council, staff, or the public request specific items to be discussed and/or removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Members of the public who wish to discuss a consent calendar item should come forward to the lectern upon invitation by the mayor and state their name and item number. If the optional sign-in card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium.
Thank you. Starting with Councilmember Hill, did you have any items to pull?
No items to pull.
Councilmember Rosansky?
None, thank you.
Councilmember Gardner?
3 and 4.
3 and 4? Okay. Councilmember Daigle?
Yes, on item number 1, I seldom make corrections to the minutes, so I'm going to make up for it, make 2 corrections. Both of these statements, if you could please consider deleting. The first was at the item 12, the December 6th meeting. It would be incorrect. I indicated that our Balboa Yacht Basin rate should be the same as CalREC. And then secondly, at the December 14th meeting at item 7, that I thank the residents who voted for me. Actually, I thanked everybody, so I just if you could make those 2 corrections. And then I wanted to pull number 9.
Okay. Councilmember Curry?
No items to pull?
Councilmember Selich?
I would have pulled 3 and 4, but Councilwoman Gardner already did it.
All right. And then I will pull item 10. Do we have a motion?
Yes. Move.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do any members of the public wish to pull any items from the consent calendar? Seeing none, now do I have a motion?
Yes. Move items number 1 through 21 and supplemental S27, making the corrections to number 1 that Councilwoman Daigle requested, and with the exception of 3, 4, 9, and 10.
Second.
I had one question. Was S27 on the consent?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Any discussion? Let's vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right. So items pulled from the consent calendar. Item number 3.
This is the updated speed limits, and I know there have been a lot of questions, particularly in one area of the city. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask staff to come up, and some of the people that were concerned didn't get to any of the study sessions, so just very briefly explain what the background is of why we raise them and how we raise them, and then with specifics to the Cameo Shores area. You sent me a very informative email, and you might want to just go over that, and I'll ask any questions, and then the public, of course, can get involved.
As staff is coming up, Councilmember Selich, did you want us to address something specific, Bayside or otherwise, or?
Yeah, I've got a series of specific
So I'll just wait
questions, but yeah, do the
Okay.
presentation
Yeah.
first.
All right.
I described that as a series of questions, too.
All right.
I just didn't pull it. Others did.
It's all yours, Mr. Public Works Director.
Okay. Thank you. Steve Batum, Public Works Director. Just to kind of briefly summarize, this, we have to update our speed survey every so many years, and it's been, 7 to 10 years since we've done that. This is necessary in order for the police department to be able to enforce the posted speeds that are posted around our city. In doing so, what's required is we do a speed survey, and we actually go out and we do kind of covert radar and find out how fast folks are traveling on the street. And generally what we do, and this is according to state rules, is we take the 85th percentile speed, and that becomes our speed limit. And generally, if it's in 5-mile-an-hour increments, so if we have to generally move up to the next increment, according to the way the state makes us set those. However, there are certain instances where we can make a 5-mile-an-hour reduction if we have situations that are not readily apparent to the motorists, accident histories and such. So it's kind of in a nutshell what we've done. We've done most of we reviewed most of the major arterials of the city. We didn't do a lot of residential streets because they're already set at 25 miles an hour per state law. And there were some that were adjusted and some that were not. Is that kind of a good enough overview for you?
Yes. And then, as I say, there was a question. I know that I got an email from Tony answering my questions, but saying that although the segment of roadway between Cameo Shores and Newport Coast will be shown in the speed survey as 55 miles per hour, we are not proposing a change in the posting of the existing 45-mile-per-hour sign just east of Cameo Shores. I conveyed that to a number of people who had asked me about it, and they said, why? How do you do that? And I went, I'll get back to you. So Tony or Steve, either one of you could ask.
Yeah,
answer that.
Tony can jump in if I get it wrong. But the idea is to have, what we do is we have to have speed zones, and we generally, they start and stop at intersections. However, if you're, let's say, traveling, you're traveling westbound on Coast Highway from Newport Coast down towards Corona Del Mar, we want to give folks an advance warning that the speed limit is going to be changing to 45. And then once we get close to, it's Poppy, right? At Poppy, it jumps down to 35 and continues at 35 throughout Corona Del Mar. The opposite holds true in the other direction, where actually when you get past Poppy, you'll see a sign for 45, so you'll be able to increase to 45. And then once you get past Cameo Shores, you'll be able to increase to 55. So the idea is to have a transition zone, and in the past it's been like 55 miles an hour straight to 45, or straight to 35, and that's generally not good practice. Does that make sense?
But so we're showing 45 miles per hour when it's actually a 55 mile per hour? I mean, that was the
Well,
confusion.
no, the 45 mile an hour sign is actually easterly of the intersection where it currently is. So you've got to give some folks some advance warning. Obviously, we want to get them slowed down by the time they get to that intersection. So the 45 mile an hour notice will start at just kind of, I guess, easterly of that intersection.
For those of you who think that means south, right?
Yeah, south. Yeah. The engineers would kind of look at it different.
Okay. And the question also, then, I know you guys have questions. I just one of the things that was of concern is that intersection at Cameo Shores and PCH. And wondering, there have been accidents. I asked Tony for the history. It seems like it's not out of line. I mean, obviously any accident is unfortunate, but in looking at the rest of the city and PCH on down through Huntington Beach, it was about, in terms of the number of cars, the number of accidents, it was very much average.
That's correct.
But there are concerns that there are a lot of children that are crossing there. The playground for Cameo Highlands is shared with Cameo Shores, so they cross there, and then also going to Newport Coast. So one of the things, not tonight, obviously, but I'd like to look at is, are there some things we can do, even if we do have this increased speed, that could improve the safety of that intersection, or better notice, or just other things? So that would be something I'll be asking Public Works to look at some point.
Maybe a countdown meter on the
that,
crossing the
and
street.
maybe some better visibility signing, changes in the striping perhaps. Maybe we take a look at the lighting there to make sure if there isn't a night issue. So yeah, we can certainly take a look at that, closer look.
Councilmember Daigle?
Yes, I have two areas of concern. The one at Vista del Oro, I appreciate Councilman Salich alerting me to that, and then also at Cameo, because I also got a lot of emails. And, you know, as a council member, when I'm told it's the state law, ma'am, I always have to look into it and say, well, what is really, how is this all put together? And it seems to me that there's a couple layers of interpretation involved. And we have the California Vehicle Code, and then what happens is Caltrans develops guidelines. So that's the first layer of interpretation. And then the city traffic engineer interprets Caltrans guidelines. And so there's a little bit of squish in all this. Not what it used to be. They have tightened it up, but there is some leeway. And keeping the speeds low is desirable for both our residents as well as the police chief, because they don't want to go to court on tickets that are just a few miles over. You know, they want 5, 10, whatever it is. And so when I looked at where the flexibility might lie, so for example, with the Cameo one, you develop some survey data, and I looked at all those numbers, and it seemed to be at the critical cusp of where you could go to 40 or to 45. It was between 43 and 44. It wasn't 44 when you go over each of those numbers. So it seems to me, without any sleight of hand, you could go down to 40 as well as if you could go to 45. Okay, so that's the first point in your data. Now, when you collected this data, it was at 10:40 in the morning. If you were to go out at 4 in the afternoon, you could get a completely different result. Okay, so we just did one data point, one time a day. Okay, so we have something to work with in terms of our sampling, and one of my suggestions would be to go out and collect more data. Okay, so that's the data issue. And then secondly, what I've been told is, well, okay, maybe we could rework the data so that we could come up with 40 miles per hour, but the real issue is the transition zone. Well, it seems to me that our current transition zone is 55 to 30, and by your own acknowledgement, there's only been 2 accidents. So it's not an unsafe condition. So if the reason is the transition zone for safety, our experience doesn't merit that.
Well, it's safety and enforcement as well, and maybe someone from the police department can clue into that. You also mentioned that the ability to round down.
Right.
That ability was taken away by the state rules. We actually have to round up. Okay,
not according to the provision that I have, that within the Caltrans guidelines, that you can round down to 40. And it's not just a function of what you mentioned where you drop down.
Well, they tell us we have to round to the closest. So, and I think the other point you raised was it is a transition zone. We're going from 35 to 55. So, one would reasonably think that we'd pick 45 in the middle. And basically, that's how it really functions today anyway. Folks, that's what they're doing. They're slowing down. They know they're coming into the town.
Right.
I think going the other way probably isn't as big of an issue, but it's still important to ramp them up slowly. But the slowdown certainly is already occurring, and I don't think it really changes much than the way it is today.
Okay. But if it becomes 45, then in order for the police chief to use the radar, he's probably not going to do so until it reaches 50 or above, as opposed to if you're 40, then you drop it down to 45. So it's always about 5 miles per hour over the speed limit that we're probably going to issue a ticket or look at radar.
Yes, that's true, but I would caution you, the problem is if we post a speed that doesn't meet the state criteria, the courts determine that as a speed trap. So then it doesn't matter how fast you're going, they'll throw the ticket out.
Right. But what I'm suggesting is when I evaluated your data, that it does meet the criteria, and that you're in that critical cusp zone where you could go either way, either to 40 or to 45. And I'm suggesting if you were to go out and retest, that you could get closer to 40, potentially depending on the time of day.
Maybe you can kind of give us the latest.
Right. No, the guidelines in terms of setting the speed limits is that they should be taken midday to get a true reading, typical reading. If you were to take something later in the afternoon, you'd be taking something closer to a peak hour traffic, and that's not what the state guidelines set up in terms of reading speeds.
Yeah, I read them pretty carefully. They didn't specify a set time of day. They said a free flow condition, but
right,
there's
and
no time.
And that's what it is.
Okay.
It's a free flow condition, and if you start getting into a 4 p.m., 5 p.m. time period of the day, then you're outside of the free flow condition. And in terms of going to a 40-mile-an-hour limit, or in a section there in a transition zone, we're trying to go sequentially in 10 mile an hour, 55, 45, 35. If we were to set it at 40, again, we'd be going 55 to 40. So we'd have a 15-mile-an-hour drop right at that point.
Right.
So we'd be running up against the same concerns that we have now with a 55 to 35. Right. It wouldn't be a big difference.
But the 15-mile-per-hour difference, we're not violating a state law. So
to reach that 40-mile-an-hour posting, we would have to make conditions not readily apparent to the motorist. We'd have to reach that finding, and we haven't reached that finding on any of the coast highway segments.
But if your data said 43.5, what I'm suggesting is you could say it's 40.
You could round up to 45, which we've done.
Or
and if
round
there are
down.
conditions not readily apparent to the motorist, you can bring it down to 40. But we haven't determined that there are conditions not readily apparent.
Did you have a question?
Councilmember Savage.
Oh, and then my other question is, I'm sorry, I know you have questions. On Vista del Oro, it was my understanding that all of Vista Del Oro was off the table, that was, none of that was going up in speed increases.
I believe that we made Vista Del Oro consistent 30 miles an hour for the entire segment of Vista Del Oro.
Okay, did you gather data for that section where it's
Yes.
really curvy?
Yes, the entire section. So we kept it a consistent 30 for the entire section of Vista Del Oro.
I don't have any more questions. My suggestion would be to gather some more data at these locations. Actually, I've been working with a traffic engineer on a project in the private sector, so I ran some of it by him. That's how I learned a lot about it. And I just think there's enough fudging in here and enough flux that we could potentially go back out and get these areas down.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Councilmember Selledge.
I just have a few questions here. You reduced your recommendation on Violito. How did you come to that conclusion?
Primarily, pedestrian usage would be the reason, crossing Violito through that segment.
Okay, so you previously hadn't put that deduction on it.
That's correct, and we reviewed that.
Is that the same thing on Riverside Drive? You did the same thing there?
Right, pedestrian usage there.
Okay, and then council members, getting on Bayside Drive, this is interesting that from Coast Highway to Promontory Drive East, which is right where the Bayside Restaurant is, that the speed limit there is going to remain the same, but with the same data from Promontory Drive East to Marine Avenue, they're applying another 5-mile-an-hour reduction on it because it's in a business district.
Correct.
So you can go 10 miles an hour in a business district where you can only go 5 miles an hour on the rest of Bayside Drive, even though that's residential?
Right, and what we did was we chose, in that case, it's a business district, and we decided to post it at 35 because it's adjacent to those businesses. And it could have been, initially, we talked about it being posted at 40, but we reduced it to 35.
Well, I appreciate you doing the 35 because it helps Balboa Island out on the electric vehicles getting to the shopping center there. But it just goes to show you the insanity of this law. It makes no sense to take the least dangerous section of the street and have it at 35 miles an hour, and the more dangerous section of the street is at the higher speed limit. I mean, it's absolutely counterintuitive to any logical thinking.
Right, and again, we're following the guidelines of the state law, and we're trying to establish speed limits that can be effectively enforced by the police department.
Well, following up on Councilwoman Daigle's suggestion, I think we've got a few segments of the streets here that I think we're going to be probably forced to approve this speed survey, but I think there's some streets, Bayside Drive and some of the other streets, that we ought to be doing further work on and looking at some modifications to the street, redoing resurveys, things of that nature, because they're not working from a safety standpoint, so we should make some adjustments to those streets and then go back and resurvey them, or do resurveys or a combination of both of those things, but somehow deal with these street segments, because to me, I'm listening to some of the stuff, and it just makes absolutely no sense from a logical standpoint to be taken on Bayside, for example, the least dangerous portion of the street and reducing the speed limit, and the most dangerous portion of the street, leaving it alone.
Again, it's the state guidelines that set the criteria and kind of tie our hands to some degree, but we can resurvey roadways to determine if there's any change in the speed limit. But
well, I think it's like Councilmember Rosansky said on Bayside Drive, and streets of that nature, that even if you put the signs up, people are still going to drive fast because of the design of the street. So I think those are the situations where we really need to take a look at doing some modifications to the street, traffic calming measures, whether it's additional traffic control devices or warning signs, or I don't know whatever, but to try and get some of the traffic slowed down and then do the surveys so we can come in with an appropriate speed limit.
right, if you were to make any physical change to the street, that would affect the speeds on that street.
Councilmember Selledge, just as a reminder to you and to the council and the public, we do have our study session for the next meeting for the 25th, to start at 4 o'clock. much of that study session is dedicated towards traffic calming in general to make sure you feel like our policy is appropriate, or would you like it changed? And also to focus on a couple of key areas, including ones that Councilmember Hill has brought up, one in Councilmember Jansky's district and your own.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Curry?
Steve, don't go away. Tony, this is one of those issues that just infuriates the public because it compels us in local government to make what appear to be irrational and what may be irrational decisions in response to state law. Just like we can't regulate the 6 and under group homes, the state has put mandates on us in terms of how we do this. I know that every member of the City Council has been briefed about these changes. I think all of us have had significant objections. I know the very first constituent complaint I got when I was appointed was traffic and speed on Newport Ridge Drive West, where we're raising the limit. Now, the dilemma that we're in, and I want to make sure that the public understands this, is that failure to act in response to this survey means that our police officers cannot enforce any speed laws on these streets, and that courts will not enforce them, that tickets will be tossed, and frankly, every defense lawyer in town knows where those streets are. And that really puts us in a dilemma. So I know we have sent this issue back for staff review to Councilmember Daigle's point several months ago, and I just wanted to be assured that you all have looked at all of these streets and all of the potential mitigating factors that could arise. And this is sort of scrubbed to the degree that there's no further scrubbing that at this point in time can be done until I think we follow up on Councilmember Selich's recommendation and go back and look at traffic calming and look at how we can otherwise modify the performance characteristics of some of these streets. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, yes.
And I want to make it clear to the public watching this, we don't necessarily think this is the right thing to do either. I mean, nobody's been more vociferous about their opposition to some of these increases than the 7 members of the council that you see up here, because we've been dealing with this issue now for the better part of 6 months. But nonetheless, it's what we're compelled to do by California law if we're to have enforceable limits on our streets and highways. And that's the advice we receive both from Public Works and from our police department.
Any further council comment or questions? All right, I'd like to open it up to public comment. If the Cameo Shores, the head of the Cameo Shores HOA, Homeowner Association, is here and would like to comment, I'd be happy to lead off with that, perhaps on behalf of others in the audience that might otherwise comment. Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Farhad Shah Hosseini. I'm a homeowner in Cameo Highlands. I'm also a board member. I'm not the president, but I'm a board member of Cameo Homeowners Association. You know, we understand, and I think Councilperson Gardner has been very patient in responding to all the emails she's received from homeowners in our community regarding the speed increase. I can tell you just about every board member have received emails also from neighbors how they're opposed to this. We understand your limitations as far as the law is concerned and what you can and cannot do. But again, this is a cross-section right at Cameo Shores and Highlands and PCH, where a lot of us cross to go to playgrounds and our private beaches at the end of that drive. And, you know, they're very concerned about the speed increase. So I'm just here as a member of our community to express our concern and wanted to voice that opposition that our homeowners have expressed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other person want to comment on this?
Dan Purcell, Corona Del Mar. I was actually in the study sessions, in the meetings when we discussed that you discussed that traffic stuff. I was out this weekend. I actually did an HD video, GPS video of those sidewalks going both directions on to Cameo Shores, and they're dangerous out there. They're very narrow. There are walls on either side, narrow sidewalks, in some cases signs in the middle of the sidewalk. So when you get pedestrians or kids and dogs going that direction, invariably some of them are going to end up down in the bike path on the highway. And sometimes bikes are going to have to swerve and go out in the highway to avoid these things that are happening where people are stepping off the curb and what have you. So I would ask you to revisit that, that speed limit there, because I personally like to see a lot more Cameo Shores and Cameo Highlands people have access, pedestrian and bicycle access, to the village in Corona Del Mar, do their shopping, come down there and do their thing. And so I'd like to see that area improved, not, increasing the speeds. Actually, I'd like to see them lowered. Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Robert Hawkins. I'm commenting on the roadway segment from West Cliff to Irvine Avenue. That has been recommended to go to 40 miles an hour, up 5 miles an hour. The roadway segment from Santiago to Santa Isabella includes an S-turn curve. That S-turn curve took, I believe, 5 teenagers 10, 20 years ago. Santiago itself has had numerous accidents since I've lived in that vicinity. And then there have been people failing to negotiate the S-turn, so not getting into the S, and then going over the curb into the back bay. The geometry or the configuration of the roadway in that S-turn is just exactly opposite what it should be, so that people accelerating into the 40, whatever, going into those are going to be very, very troubled. And we're going to end up with more accidents along those S-turns. So I would encourage you to send this back for those roadway segments so that the Public Works Department can look at these issues and confirm that we're not going to exacerbate an already bad situation. Thank you.
Any other comment on this item?
Hi, my name is Nicole Foster. I'm a resident of Cameo Highlands, and not to beat the dead horse of the Cameo thing. One thing you mentioned was the one place where you could reduce the speeds had to do with pedestrian traffic, and I'm wondering how you collected that data, and if any of that data has been collected for pedestrian traffic coming from the Shores or Highlands area into the village. And also, we have an electric vehicle, and to be able to turn from Cameo, which is a Corona Del Mar neighborhood, and access the village, we can only go 35 miles an hour. So I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for people who want to use their electric vehicles and do their business in town, if all the speed limits are determined only because of what the transition speed is east or south of Cameo Highlands. And it seems like it's more about making that transition there than it is am I making sense? It seems like it's more about that it's 55 here, and so it can't be 35 here, where it should be 35 to keep all the kids safe and people that want to use electric vehicles. Is there a way of going back and looking at the speeds even south, and maybe you back up the 55-mile-an-hour transition zone to the south or east of Cameo? And I guess my other question is this a done deal? Is there an opportunity for there to be more research and possibility of changing that, actually, not even to 45, but to have that be a 35-mile zone all the way from Cameo into the village?
Tony or Steve, is there something where if we want to encourage electric cart use that we can use that as a rationale?
I think what's going to happen, when we looked at this again, that 35 segment that we wanted to turn into a transition zone 45, based on the speed measurements that we've collected with this survey, if we left it at 35, it would clearly be a speed trap. And we can't establish a speed trap. So, again, we're going from a 55
I understand
segment,
all that. We've talked about it. But
so
I'm just asking, is there anything that gives us some leeway, some flexibility, because we want to encourage electric cars? And we're saying, I mean,
There's nothing particularly written in the state law that talks about establishing speed limits on a segment of roadway to encourage electric vehicles. We need to establish the speed limits per the state law so that they can be enforceable by the police department, so that they match the speeds that people are driving on the roadway. I'd be a little concerned with a segment of roadway that would be set at 35 miles an hour, posted at 35, when you have a lot of traffic on that segment of the roadway, non-electric vehicles that are going 45 or plus 45. So I have a little bit of a concern with that,
Right.
Particularly Coast Highway.
And the second question that was brought up, was there consideration given to the amount of pedestrian traffic there is between, say, Cameo Shores and Corona Del Mar proper?
We didn't do counts, pedestrian counts in particular, no.
Well, so what's the
areas-
difference between the pedestrian, and I'm sure there's a rationale, but we need to explain it, between the pedestrian rationale along Lido or Riverside and an area like the Coast Highway?
The difference is that we looked at heavy pedestrian usage immediately adjacent to the roadway. So the locations where we use pedestrians as a consideration and a reduction, it was a park or a school immediately adjacent to the roadway. In the case of Via Lido, the shops and the different features, the business features immediately adjacent to the roadway. That segment would be there's no businesses or parks immediately adjacent to the roadway. So that was the consideration for that.
Yeah, but that's the only way for people out of Cameo Shores and Cameo Highlands if they want to walk to Corona Del Mar to get there.
Right, and we didn't do counts per se. We did not do pedestrian counts.
Is there, again, with these guidelines, are there numbers? I mean, is there something that says, okay, if you have 2,000 people a day walking down here, that's a pedestrian issue, or is it just more of attractive nuisances and that sort of thing as far as
There's no set numbers, no.
Well,
and again, where we did use it in the speed surveys, it was adjacent to schools, adjacent to parks, immediately adjacent to a business district where we know there are heavy pedestrians crossing the roadway. This is a section where you can have pedestrian traffic along the side of the roadway, and it's not adjacent to a park, it's not adjacent to a school, and that was the factor considered.
All right, I know if you feel like you're getting things thrown at you, but I think we need to, the mind boggles, but, so if we said, okay, we just feel like there's too much foot traffic here, again, do you feel that would lead us into a speed trap situation, or can we utilize that kind of rationale?
Yeah, we would have to make a finding of a condition not readily apparent to reduce it to 5 miles an hour. But what we'd have there then is, again, a 55-mile-an-hour segment between Newport Coast and Cameo going down to a 40-mile-an-hour segment immediately, and you'd have a 15-mile-an-hour drop right at Cameo Shores. So we're trying to transition it into the village, and we're trying to avoid a sharp drop in speed limits from one section to another. As it is today, you're going from a 55 into a 35, and that's really a speed trap as it's set up today. So we're trying to get into what can be an enforceable speed limit through that segment. That was the recommendation.
Now that raises a question with me. I mean, it seems to me that it is not apparent when driving down PCH that a sidewalk that has nothing but landscaping along it would be a high-traffic pedestrian sidewalk. I mean, it's not obvious. If you're going to go into a business district, then I guess it's obvious there should be people there. But if we have a sidewalk that has a consistent foot traffic on it and has kids on it, to me, that's not readily apparent, which would give us some kind of logic to reduce the speed limit. If we were to reduce the speed limit, then we have an issue of going from 50 or 55 down to 35, which to me, in logic, says you need to push the deceleration further south, and that you need to start the deceleration further south to eliminate a speed trap. I mean, is there any logic in applying that to the state process?
To try and keep that transition, you would. you would have to push the speed limits lower further south, but it becomes difficult when you're talking about the measured speeds near Newport Coast Drive are in the 59, plus mile-an-hour speeds. You find it very difficult to justify bringing that down to a 50 or something in that range and have that in your speed survey.
Are you just moving your speed trap then?
You're just moving things further south. I mean, we don't control Coast Highway from Newport Coast Drive down towards Laguna Beach, so those speeds are then established by the state. So all of a sudden you'd be running into whatever the state decides to set between Laguna Beach and Newport Coast to then a speed, beyond Newport Coast Drive and how that would be set. So we're trying to look at this.
But could you do that? I mean, could you say, all right, you got 55 because it's Caltrans, and then you get to Newport Coast and you're 50, and then you're at Cameo Shores and you're 40 or something, and by pushing that back?
If I could just step in for just a second. I think we're kind of splitting hairs over pedestrian traffic. And, I could submit to you that the pedestrian volume crossing Coast Highway at Superior is way, way higher than Cameo Shores, but yet I don't think we'd want to lower the speed limit of West Coast Highway to 35. I think it's really has to do with, how heavy is this volume? And we can go look at that. But I would chance to say that it's probably not as heavy as it is consistently up and down Coast Highway. In a business district, you have a little different feel, a lot of different activities going on. So I think we'd be hard-pressed, and even if we could lower by 5 miles an hour, I mean, remember the speed limit that was set, or the speed survey said it was, 43.5.
Right.
Even if we could lower it, it could only be lowered to 40. So we could never get to 35, even if we could make that justification.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I appreciate your acknowledging that by virtue of the speed survey you did, we could probably do 40. It seems like your main point or your main rationale is the transition zone. Is that correct? Okay, so even if we could be real rigid or we could be a little bit flexible, and even if we were maybe 43.8, we could resurvey. So we could probably get there with a survey. So I appreciate your acknowledging that. The rationale now is that the transition zone. Is that what you're saying, that you have to sort of de-accelerate and not too many miles per hour?
Yeah, there has to be some kind of a change. I mean, you can't enforce it if you're just going from 55 miles an hour and suddenly drop to 35.
Okay. What are they doing now? What's the condition out there now?
Well, there's this 45 mile an hour sign, but it's never been.
Okay.
It's not in the books. Essentially, what we're talking about is kind of already out there.
Okay.
But we're really not changing it. It's just not in the books. And maybe the appropriate location of the signs we could play with and adjust. But I think, that's what we're looking at. I also want to point out in the areas where we did lower the speed limit, we were talking about crosswalks that were not signalized. And this is a signalized crosswalk at Cameo. At Violito, there's non-signalized crosswalk. At Riverside, there was a non-signalized crosswalk. So those are the two locations that we most recently re-looked at. So it's a difference if it's signalized or non-signalized. So it's another factor.
Councilmember Selich.
Yeah, so let me understand this correctly now. So we could go, if I understand what you guys just got done saying, I'm not saying I understand what you say, but I'll try and repeat it, that we could make a finding, this council could make a finding on pedestrian activity on that segment of Coast Highway, reduce the speed limit, move the transition zone further towards Newport Coast Drive, and that gets on the books, we adopt the survey, and that stays that way unless someone challenges the veracity of our survey in court. And then they would come back and they would question the rationale we used in lowering the speed limit because of pedestrian activity. The worst case would be that we would lose that. Does that invalidate the whole survey, or do we just have to come back and redo that segment of the survey again? How does that work?
Well, I can't speak for the police department, and maybe they can speak to that enforcement issue. But I think if we went and did something knowingly, we see that as a violation of the state law. I mean, that's knowingly creating a speed trap. If we're posting something, we know for sure. Now, if we had heavy documentation that said there is a heavy number of pedestrian crossing here, and we could justify it, then I think we could do that lowering. But I think if you go back and we count the number of pedestrians at Cameo Shores, and we compare that up and down Coast Highway to the numbers that are crossing now, we'd be pretty hard-pressed to justify lowering the speed limit at that location.
Well, it may not be a matter of knowing, just be a matter that the council has a different opinion than you have.
That's fine, we could do that. But I think I'd like to hear from the police department on the enforceability of that.
Well, you don't know till someone challenges it when you go to court.
That's true. You're right. I mean, we could do that. But we're just telling you what our opinion is in the Public Works Department.
All right. Well, I believe we're still in public comment here. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on this issue?
Leanne Bowman, resident of Irvine Terrace and also on the board. And they're increasing the speed limit at Pacific Coast Highway and Jamboree. And there's also an Irvine Terrace entrance. And I feel that the speed limit already is plenty adequate. I can't imagine it being safe to come out, and believe it's going to be increased to 50 miles an hour. And I feel that's too fast. There's also a lot of pedestrian traffic there on Jamboree crossing over, and also Irvine Terrace also to cross over to the golf course. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Let's come on down and get ready to come to the microphone. If you want to make a comment, come on down.
This will be very brief. Karen Tringali, Cameo Highlands. Just as a matter of perspective, there's 147 homes in Cameo Highlands. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40% of those homes have children. All the homeowners in those 147 homes have to cross Pacific Coast Highway to get to the beach. 35 to 40% of the homes with children have to cross Pacific Coast Highway to get to the playground. And that probably is not readily apparent to drivers. So I guess if we're looking for a hook, that might be the one. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm B.J. Johnson, and I live in Corona Del Mar. And I just drove in from Laguna Beach, and I saw the speed limit says they changed and everything. I really think that the entrances into Corona Del Mar, as the speed limits are now, are plenty high enough. It's very difficult, or you're just not really thinking when you're speeding along that you're going to have to slow down into the village, and you come into the village way too fast. And I think if you raise the speed limit, you're going to find that still a problem. I think if we had people, I'm sorry I'm late because you probably heard this before, but that's my thoughts. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Seeing no further public comment, I'll bring it back to council for any remaining discussion and perhaps a motion.
I'll move the item.
There's a motion to approve the item as submitted, seconded by Councilmember
I'd like
Curry.
to propose an amendment to the item, and that would be that it's approved as staff recommendation, but that we do further study on the following streets. Let's see here. Irvine Avenue, where Mr. Hawkins mentioned between, was it Westcliff and Santiago? Westcliff and Santiago, segment of Vista del Oro in East Bluff. I can't read my writing here. Coast Highway and Cameo Shores, Bayside Drive. And there's one other one here, and I can't read it. Is there another one I missed you had a concern about?
I think that's it.
Okay.
I'd certainly support that, yeah. And I appreciate Public Works acknowledging that with Cameo, it really is on the cusp, and we could go either way.
So there's an amendment proposed. Do we have discussion on the amendment?
Just to clarify, so we would adopt the staff recommendation, but we would do further studies that may result in a recommendation to come back and modify what's in the staff report in the future if data supports that?
Right, for those segments.
Okay, but what's in here will be adopted going forward. Okay,
I'll amend my motion.
Now, the second, et cetera.
All right. So the motion on the table then is to approve the staff recommendation with the exception of further study for Irvine Avenue, Westcliff to Santiago, the section of Vista del Oro that was discussed, the Coast Highway coming into Cameo Shores, and Bayside Drive, where Councilmember Sellers
clarification. Are we adopting this with a recommendation that they go back and do further study, or except for those, we're not going to raise it on those streets?
No, my understanding is to go for further study on those segments.
Right, for further study, but still adopt the report, but for further study, and if the studies warrant, we can adjust the speed limits. What I'm saying is, don't wait till the next time we do a speed survey to deal with these problem streets. Let's adopt the survey.
Well, I guess, let me further clarify. Are we going to go ahead and raise the speed limits, but we're going to request that staff does further studies
Yes.
with the potentiality of reducing them later on? That's my understanding of it, but I
Yes.
think what Mike said was a little
That's my
different.
motion, or my amendment.
Okay.
Okay, we're all clear on that? Any further discussion?
Before you close this item, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I did want to put a finer point on something Councilmember Daigle said in the discussion with Public Works. It's not my understanding, for the record, that Public Works said if you were at 40, if you were above 42.5, like you're at 43, that you could round down. I wanted to clarify if that's something, Councilmember Daigle, you heard, or if Public Works want to confirm or deny that, because I think it's important for the record. It's my understanding that you can no longer round down.
Councilmember Daigle?
Any concerns about that, Councilmember?
I think that what happens is if your initial reading is 43, you would have to round up, but then if there are conditions not readily apparent, you could bring it down to 5 miles an hour. That's how the system, that's how the
As long as
law is
that's
written.
clear.
Right. Yeah, it's my understanding that, let's say it's 44 and you do 45, you could do -5 if you have a finding. There's a lot of accidents there. But if you're 43.5, you could go to 40. That's my understanding, which is different than
The
Public
latter
Works.
is not my understanding
Okay.
of Public Works' opinion. Just for the record, we may have a respectful disagreement on that, but it's Public Works' belief that you have to round up if you're at 42.6 and above.
Okay, and they're saying that's in a guideline, in the Caltrans guideline?
I'm seeing heads nodding.
Okay.
All right, seeing no further discussion, let's vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, that was easy.
Yes, fun.
Item number 4 was pulled.
Yes, I asked to pull this one. This is something that the council has been asking for, that one of the frustrations we have had is with restaurants under current management where we feel they have been good citizens and responsible and good neighbors in their communities. When they've asked to add something such as music, we have been hesitant because over the years, the city's often gotten burned when the establishment changes hands and the next person isn't as good a citizen. And then we get all the complaints, and it's always hard to pull those back. So to be able to separate this, the music and things, with the operator instead of running with the land is terrific. And I'm really pleased we finally have it. My one concern about what I see here is I don't see any spot for public input. And that has been very important in the process in the past because we've had neighbors, for example, come forward and say, well, gee, they're doing this or this or this, and I don't know whether maybe that's already planned, but it isn't in here per se. I just see the police chief making the decision, and I don't know, as I say, where there is room for public input, and I think that could be important.
How about we have a staff presentation of this, and perhaps along the way, we can address Councilmember Gardner's concern?
We certainly can. I just want to start off by saying that this would really apply to new operations or expanded operations, which will be going through a use permit process, so there will be public opportunity and public notice as part of that process. So they'd be looked at concurrently. And Associate Planner Mr. Murillo here can provide an overview of the overall process.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Here tonight to introduce this ordinance that would add a new chapter to the municipal code requiring this operator license for certain establishments that offer alcoholic beverages for on-site consumption. Just for a little background, this ordinance evolved from April 2010 study session that we had with the council where we discussed a number of alcohol-related problems associated with certain bars and nightclubs but more specifically restaurants that tend to change their operation in late evenings and begin to operate more like bars and nightclubs. And although we do have an existing zoning tool in place which requires use permits for these establishments to operate, and we're able to conditionally approve these establishments and their design and operation, the use permit is a vested land use approval and runs with the land. And the direction from council at that time was to develop a license that is specific to the operator, provides the city a lot more control over that operation, and can more easily be revoked if necessary. So staff worked closely with the city attorney's office and the police department, as well as code enforcement and the revenue division to put together this ordinance. We also hired a consultant, Jim Hare, to help prepare the ordinance. So this is what we have before you today. As Jim Campbell stated, this would apply prospectively to new bars, lounges, or nightclubs, and also restaurants that provide alcohol service and either have late hours, which is defined as beyond 11 p.m., have live entertainment, and or provide dancing.
Does that include DJs even if there's not dancing?
Correct.
Well, I want to make sure about that, because, you know, a DJ is, it's really just amplified music, right? It's not, so within the definition of entertainment, it would cover a DJ playing recorded music.
That's correct. The current municipal code section, we do have a live entertainment permit section that defines entertainment, and that does include the use of a DJ or any live act. The permit would be issued to an operator and would not be transferable. So unlike a use permit, which does run with the land, if the restaurant is sold to a subsequent operator, we may not have to bring back the use permit. However, the new operator would have to come in and secure the new operator license. The authority for the license would be the police department. They would be the one reviewing the application, considering comments from other departments, and ultimately making the decision on the permit, with the exception that their decision can be appealable to the city manager, whose decision would then be final. An important aspect about the operator license is that the police department can issue or apply specific conditions on that operation, ranging from condition or hours of operation or any component of that operation, such as the hours, how late they can have live entertainment or dancing. It can require physical improvements, such as sound attenuation requirements, or it can be oriented towards management, such as crowd management, or require more detailed security plans. So as I stated previously, it will apply prospectively, so this would only be applicable to new establishments requiring new use permits or existing establishments that are seeking to expand, which would trigger an amendment to their use permit. The exception to that would be any existing restaurant or bar that is seeking an increase in their building occupancy through the building code, in which case this ordinance would apply. We would also be able to apply this to any nonconforming use that loses its nonconforming status, such as a bar which operated before the city's use permit requirements. Should there be a situation where they lose their nonconforming status, such as if ABC suspends their license for a period of time, we can then apply this ordinance as well.
Question for you. Which of these activities are currently governed by the use permit process? Because it seems like a fundamental change is maybe things that the Planning Commission, which is appealable to the City Council, now consider. You know, we would essentially be abdicating our authority to the police chief and to appealable to the city manager. I mean, which of these activities currently the Planning Commission and Council are under our purview?
We're not recommending any changes to the use permit process. The Planning Commission and the Council still have full authority and review through the use permit process to look at land use compatibility, and that does include aspects of operation. However, what this does provide is an additional tool on top of that to be able to look at these operations and modify or revoke should there be a need in the future once these use permits have been issued.
So let's say I'm a restaurant and I come in and I apply for a license and the police chief says, no, and I appeal it to the city manager and he says no. Or let's say I'm a resident and there was a restaurant application and the police chief said yes and the city manager said yes and, maybe I thought the hours were too extensive. Is that kind of what we're looking at here? I mean, once you get or don't get that operator's license, that's really, there's nothing the council can do about that.
I might address that question in maybe a slightly different way. First of all, the operator's license would have to be consistent with whatever land use rights granted by the Planning Commission or the City Council. So if it's authorized to be till 2 a.m. as a land use right, we really couldn't curtail that back with this license. But I envision, say, a new operation coming in, and then the hours pass. Hours of operation might be the one that we might really kind of focus on here. We might authorize that through a use permit that they may be open until 2 o'clock in the morning, subject to the having an operator's license, which would then give the police chief the opportunity maybe to curtail that back if we have some problems out there. So the two would have to work in concert with each other. The city council would retain, and the planning commission and the council would retain all full jurisdiction over the use permit. It's just an additional tool, and so that's one way that these would work together. And it would allow the chief to maybe curtail operations or change them, add security, add other physical features to address nuisances or other law enforcement problems consistent with the use permit. And he couldn't authorize anything beyond the use permit.
Councilmember Selledge.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to see this come in front of us. This is an idea I had 15 years ago, so if you hang around long enough, I guess things happen.
Well, you did that quicker than the building code, anyway.
Yeah. This isn't exactly the way I had envisioned it, though. I guess I had envisioned that it would be a bifurcated permit that would go to the Planning Commission and not to the police, and not have this part of it go to the police chief. And that's not to say this isn't a bad idea, but I guess I was curious why it wouldn't be a process that would just go with the use permit to the Planning Commission, and there would be an operator component to that permit that wasn't tied to the land use, and then the Planning Commission would handle the approval of it, and it would work closer with the use permit. And the police department can do all the enforcement and everything, but in terms of the approval, because then you have a public hearing process, people are notified. You're not setting up a separate public hearing process. There's a clear line of appeals to redress any objections people might have. And it seems to me, from my point of view, that might fit smoother into the system we already have than creating a separate permit like this with, it appears to be anyway, limited appealability.
When we decided to put this in the hands of the police chief, we wanted to do that principally for enforcement reasons. It allows the chief to, if there's substantial evidence of a nuisance or a problem with law enforcement issues, to really step in on a quick basis to take some action. When we're looking at a use permit or maybe an operator's license that is, in essence, a use permit in a different title, then you're looking at appellate rights. It becomes a political process, if you will, through the Planning Commission and Council. And we felt that this was a quicker enforcement tool. We've done some enforcement. The most recent one, Newport Beach Brewing Company, where we went to the Planning Commission and the City Council, and we felt that was really an unsatisfying process. And we finally got to some resolution, and we felt that this was a better approach. It does provide due process, appeal to the city manager. We could add, if the council wants, a provision that requires a separate notice, if you will, of the chief's actions. We can add that to the ordinance if that's the council's desire. We actually have that if that's what the council directs. But we felt that this was a more effective tool for enforcement, doing it in this fashion and having it go to the police chief.
Yeah. I think one of my goals anyway was to not get into situations when we revoke these things, that we have the situation like we had with the Newport Brewing Company, that we can go and have a quick revocation process. So I would want to maintain that. But it would seem to me that if you had a public hearing body involved somehow, it would give people that have concerns like they do on a use permit a forum to express their opinions on something like that. So if there would be a way to maintain that and still keep the quick revocability, because I think that's a key issue here. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're here, is because it's so difficult to revoke a land use permit.
It seems to me that the closer this process comes, though, to a use permit process, by any other name, it's a use permit process, and we get into all of the definitional proof requirements, et cetera, associated with use permit. I guess I'd like the city attorney to comment on that, but also comment on whether or not we could require the police department, for example, to solicit public input prior to their granting of a decision. Why can we not ask the police department to solicit public input in making their decision?
Now, maybe before...
City attorney?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'll take that point. I think that we can. It's really in what the council wants to add to this ordinance. We had crafted some language that would require notification, and then the police chief would take that input. And I think when we look at this prospectively for new operations or expanded operations that are subject to a use permit, there will be that opportunity and that forum for the Planning Commission or the City Council to evaluate the community's input at that point in time.
Except,
and that can be reviewed by the police chief.
Except in the circumstance of a building occupancy increase, that may not involve a public hearing process, right?
Indeed, it wouldn't, and that's why we've prepared at least a notification process or addition. I think Mr. Murillo handed that out, I believe.
That's correct. We anticipated this question, and we prepared an amendment to the ordinance, or a revision, that would require at least 10 calendar days prior to the decision on the issuance of this permit that the chief of police, or at least the city, would mail out a notice of this application to all property owners within a 300-foot radius. And within that notice, it would indicate that written comments can be submitted to the chief of police for their consideration prior to the issuance of that permit.
Now, this would cover the eventuality where it's a change in operator without an expansion or a new use. It would cover that situation. It would also cover this circumstance where an operator might go to the building department seeking an increase in occupancy based on maybe a slightly different floor plan. There are ways to do that on an administrative basis. And I think in those circumstances, we would apply the ordinance. They would be required to get this operation, and this would provide notice to the community that the community, the police chief would consider for those that are outside that use permit process. And so, if that's indeed a concern, we can add this language here as proposed.
Yeah, I guess what I'd suggest is, first off, it ought to be 14 days, but secondly, we also ought to require that the police chief take into account public testimony given at a use permit hearing in making his decision, as a factor in making his decision, and that in the absence of a public hearing process, the police department be required to solicit public input in some fashion like this.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
It seems to me that this is a very, very good idea that has become very complex. Over years of history, applicants have come forth to change their conditional use permit for operations that involve entertainment or late hours. And they have, I'll use the word often, been denied on the basis that because that permit runs with the property, no one knows who the next tenant will be, and therefore there's the desire of not to give that flexibility. And it's always said with, and we know that you're a good operator that wouldn't do that, but we just can't determine who the next operator will be. And that the intent was, as I understood it, going back many years ago, was that isn't there a way that we could separate the fact that this particular site is a restaurant site versus those, what one might call extreme or out of the ordinary operational issues, which have been pretty well defined as hours beyond 11 o'clock, entertainment, dancing, these types of things. And so it seems to me that the issue, if you will, is that the concept is here, but there has not been a clear definition between when the conditional use permit that goes with the land would end and the operational permit that goes with the operator would begin. Because I've heard you say two different things. I mean, I've heard you say it only affects new properties or new permits that are coming in or that type of thing. But if you have an existing property that today, by grant of title with land, has a 2 a.m. closing and has full liquor license and has dancing and entertainment and everything, and that operator moves across the street because there's better parking and lower rent, the vacated property, then you're going to have to go back into and change the conditional use permit, it seems to me. If I'm understanding what you're trying to do, and in one sense you said you would, in another sense you said no, you're only going to deal with the new place, if you will. And what if the new place already is entitled for that? Now does that operator have to go in for a permit? I mean, it seems to me the idea is good, but we don't have a clear definition of the separation or how it's to be implemented. And clearly, public input has not been included in the implementation of the operational aspect of it. Other than that, I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. Councilmember Selich, I think you had more questions.
Well, I think most of them have been answered through some of the discussion, but just one question on the appeal process. It ends with the city manager, and there's no appeal to the council?
At the way the ordinance is structured, there is no appeal to the city council. The next would be the courts after that if the operator didn't feel they got a fair shake with the police chief.
Would it hurt the integrity of the ordinance to have it appealable to the council? I mean, it seems to me that something like this, whether you're a resident that has a problem with it or an operator that has a problem with the decision, there at least ought to be a recourse through the city council.
If you're going to do that, take me out of it, because that way it saves me some time. Why doesn't it just go from the chief to the council?
And it certainly can do that. I would share with you the rationale for taking it the way it was written.
Yeah,
and
please.
What we've tried to do is create a separate process so we can make a clear distinction, which maybe we failed to do, between the use permit and the license. And the importance of making that distinction is that lawyers tend to argue that if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and swims like a duck, it's a duck. So if we're doing this all in the same process of issuing a conditional use permit through the same hearings, through the same processes, and through the same authoritative bodies, I know what I'll argue is you can't terminate this thing without going through the same process, sort of an equal dignities type of approach.
So you think the council being on the appeal chain would
muddies the water and
ordinance?
makes it more difficult to keep the distinction between the two different permits and makes it more difficult to enforce through termination.
I think there is a distinction in process, though, because the land use one is going from the planning commission to the council. You know, this is the police chief, and then appealable to the council. There's, harbor commissions appealable to the council. There's lots of decisions that ultimately go to the council. I mean, we oversee pretty much everything. So I don't know. That's the only thing that I find troublesome about this is the appeal process, that we would all be at the mercy of the police chief. Maybe that's how it should be, but...
And I certainly respect that, and the concern we have is that separation as well, and you certainly have that authority and can do that. When you find yourself in enforcement situations like this, it gets more difficult and gets turned into a political issue as well, and that puts you in a difficult spot, and we find ourselves struggling with some of those issues. I think something to keep in mind as well is that should the police chief terminate that license, it doesn't have to be gone forever. They could reapply, they can clean up their act, they can enter into new different conditions, and not that again goes to the police chief. So it really has more flexibility to be able to address operational needs as it's written now, but it's certainly in the council's authority to bring it to itself. Staff is simply recommending against that.
Well, I would just say that if it is, as you say, it becomes sort of a political issue, then it seems to me we're the ones that should get the grief and not the city manager.
Mm-hmm.
We are the political body in a sense, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I know I think if I were a resident or a business owner, I would like to feel that the ultimate arbiters were the people I had elected and could vote out of office the next time around or something.
Well, is it your opinion that if it is appealable, if the police chief's decision is appealable directly to the city council, does that muddy it up so much that we don't achieve our purpose here?
I think it raises the issue that we could muddy the waters so that we don't achieve the purpose. I'm not saying it does. I'm saying a lawyer is going to argue that we're treating it more like a conditional use permit. That having been said, I understand what Councilmember Gardner is saying, and it's certainly in your prerogative. We look at this more as, because of the multiple issues that have occurred in other places, as a code enforcement issue that we're trying to help you be able to deal with effectively and efficiently. And certainly you have the prerogative. From our perspective, it's cleaner this way, and it avoids certain legal arguments that would otherwise be made.
I have, excuse me, Councilmember Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we run the risk of doing what we did, I think, with dogs on the beach and stepping in it sometimes to try and make it up while we're up here on the DS. I think the city attorney has given a pretty good rationale for the process being the way it is, and frankly, it should be a depoliticized process. The police chief should make an informed judgment about whether or not there are impacts that fall under his purview as part of this analysis, and then that can be appealed to the city manager, but I think trying to make those issues in a political context we are not well served by doing that. So with the amended language passed out, I think that addresses the issue of due process and of notice, and I think that's really what we were trying to get at, so that the public has the opportunity to weigh in should they want to do so in one of these situations.
I guess I'd like to hear from the police chief how he feels about being put right on point on this kind of an issue.
Thank you, sir. I actually like the idea.
Will you be wearing a gun at these public permit hearings?
You better believe it.
Okay.
As you know, I came from Long Beach, the city of Long Beach, and there I was a commander and oversaw the policing of the dining and entertainment district there in Long Beach. And I had similar authority there where it essentially gave some teeth to keep those bars and establishments that were not responsible, help to keep them in line. And the way that worked, and as you know, we have, if you don't know this, we have, over 800, on average, about 800 drunk arrests a year and over 600 DUI arrests a year. Most of those occur after 11 o'clock at night. And it's usually the result of irresponsible bar owners. What I did in Long Beach, in the 3 years I oversaw that dining and entertainment district, I used it twice on 2 establishments. And what I did is I just modified their use on a 30-day basis. One establishment, I required them to close their queue. Their line outside had to be closed off at 11 or 12 o'clock at night. I required them to have an extra security guard there for 30 days, kind of a probation period. And then the other establishment is very similar. One of them I had to have them close their doors and windows because of the noise issue. It was a 30-day period, and then they became in compliance. They got it. It hit them in the pocketbook is what it did. It fixed the problem. That's the only time I've had to use it.
So you're in favor of being on point here?
Absolutely in favor of this, because I think it's good. Just so you know, I'm very pro-business. I want businesses to succeed here in the city. I think the police department does. However, they need to be responsible businesses. And right now, I don't think we have the teeth to keep them responsible, and this does that. It does it for me as far as the community input. The 6 months I've been here, I've noticed that the community is not shy about giving me their input. And one of the things that I look at when we look at least I looked at in Long Beach, when I looked at modifying any kind of operator's permit, was first I look at call volume, calls for service, calls that the community has called in and complained about this establishment. I look at all the calls. Sometimes we even recontact those people who've called in to do more follow-up on the issues that they're seeing out there, and basically put together, establish for the owner that we sit down with and say, listen, this is a problem that we're seeing. We can work together and you can fix this. If you don't fix it, this is the next step we have to take to get you in compliance, and it'll be X, Y, or Z modification of that operator's permit.
Okay.
I have a question. I guess I understand how that works with an existing operator, but how would you handle the new guy that's leasing a space in town, applying for a use permit, and now he needs his operator's license, really doesn't have a history,
Right.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors that we have to examine. First of all, where is it going? What are the issues that I have there already with alcohol establishments? I do agree that there has to be some input from the community ahead of time. I think that's important. I think what Jim proposed here, I think, might work well to have some input from the community on that end as well. I'm not as concerned about that part as I am concerned about being able to have it to actually put some teeth and hold people accountable and responsible for their business, if that makes sense. But on the front end, there's a lot of factors we need to look at. What's happening now? I mean, do I have an establishment there that's already a problem that the community's already complaining about? If that's the case, and the community doesn't really want this problem again next door to it, well, that's going to be a factor involved in that. And we also look at maybe history of owners. A lot of times these bar owners it's an owner that has multiple bars. And if I have a problem with him here, here, and here, why would I want to give you another one here? So we look at all those types of factors.
Thank you.
I absent any other council member questions, I had a couple more questions here. How does the standard of proof compare for a revocation of an operator license as compared to a use permit? For example, my understanding under a use permit is you really have to have, it's a high bar of proof for public safety, nexus to the establishment, history of police calls. I mean, it's a high standard of proof under a use permit. Is the standard of proof to revoke an operator license by the police department different?
Yes. A use permit conveys a property right. Property rights covered by the due process clause of the United States and California constitutions. We have to meet a constitutional standard of proof to revoke a property right. That's why use permits get to be so difficult. It's not that they can't be done. They can. You have to prove all the things that you're talking about. The burden's on the city, and we have to make the proof and be sure that the record shows with not only substantial evidence but compelling evidence, because we're removing a property right under the Constitution. When someone has a license or a permit, it's not considered a property right. It's considered more of a privilege and can be administratively terminated without that type of standard. It does not have constitutional protection. Not unlike what we talked about with respect to moorings. Moorings were not property rights. They were permits or in the nature of licenses. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to meet constitutional standards for revocation of those rights. Which I wouldn't call rights, forgive me, but the revocation of those privileges.
And the menu of remedies that the police department could apply is a very broad menu of remedies.
Yes, and I think the chief is
almost
really
limited by their imagination.
Well, right. Which he has very little limit to, I understand. He can further condition it. He can do an appropriate approach is a graduated type of discipline, which the chief has just outlined for you. Or if it's such a bad situation, he could terminate straight out. And I think it gives it into his discretion to make those determinations, to use that wisely to achieve compliance.
And I want to be clear, if it is to be appealed, it could be appealed either by the operator or by anyone else. It wasn't clear to me here.
The way the ordinance is currently drafted, it can only be appealed by the operator.
Yeah, see, that's a problem, because if the police department grants the operator license, there ought to be an opportunity to appeal that decision by a resident. Right?
And I understand your concerns, and I think that that's something that can be addressed. I would be interested in the staff's position on it, who wrote the ordinance.
That wouldn't affect the effectiveness of the ordinance?
No, I don't think it would affect the effectiveness of the ordinance. I think that as long as the appellate rights are the same and they go to the city manager with respect to it, if you have aggrieved parties, they're not, I think it makes the process more complex. But I think it keeps it sufficiently clean that it won't affect our ability to enforce.
But could anybody appeal? I mean, somebody who's not even impacted could just say, well, I just think there are too many bars in Newport, and so I'm going to appeal this?
None of our ordinances have what we would call it a jurisdictional question or an aggrieved party requirement. Individuals can appeal from land use determinations if they're affected, and they claim they're affected. So I don't think we've ever had a problem with someone who's just passing through appealing. I can see an appeal. Well, let's use the port as a neighbor who lives 3 streets down, but they always get someone who's there and noisy at 2 o'clock. Not that that's happening with the port, but I'm just as a hypothetical. They could appeal because they're an aggrieved party, they have an interest involved. We could write in an aggrieved party status type of a statute. I just don't think it's necessary because of the way our ordinances have operated.
How do you prevent 20 people lining up and each one coming in and appealing? As soon as that one's told no, the next one shows up on the door.
There's a limited period of time to appeal, just like in any other appellate situation, and that's the way you treat it.
So it's just one appeal no matter how many people lined up?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's correct.
Does staff have any problem with somebody besides the applicant appealing a decision here?
No, we don't. I think at this point, it does indicate appealable by the applicant, and it would be a limiting phrase in my mind. We don't have, as Mr. Attorney Hunt indicated, we don't have an aggrieved person definition in the code. Typically, in our system, with use permit, anyone can appeal it. Typically, it's a resident in the area or a homeowners association. We can amend the code to provide that privilege for the community to appeal easily.
All right, and one last question. I didn't see that there is an expiration date associated with the operator license. Am I correct in that understanding?
That's correct. It would run with that operator, and it
So
would...
long as they operate.
As long as they operate it
In good
in
standing.
an appropriate manner, they're fine. To be transferred to a new operator, it has to go through a new process. They're non-transferable. Or if we went and revoked it.
Okay, any other comments by council? Otherwise, we'll open it up to public comment. Okay, we're open for public comment on this item. Anybody wish to comment?
Good evening, council and staff. Can you hear me now? Okay. I do want to, sorry, I haven't done this for a while. Marcia Dossie, I live on the peninsula. I have several restaurant clients as well, so I'm here in voicing their opinion as well. The need for more, we need more establishments for dancing. We can count on our hand 5, less than 10 in this city. They have slowly been closed one by one by one over the years. But we need to expand the current establishments, and code enforcement has not helped us in this. We'd like you to look at the current use permits to see if entertainments are even authorized. On some of the establishments that have caused problems, there is not a entertainment permit. We'd like you to review the impact of the adjoining businesses and the effect of the businesses that have the entertainment permits, and that maybe the establishments that are adjoining have been refused, as Mr. Hill had said, because they couldn't count on them or because there's others in the area. And there's lost revenue there, not only for the vendor or the establishment, but for the city as well. And these are responsible establishments. We'd like the unaddressed complaints of the noise, debris, vandalism, and public relieving to be addressed as well. And these would be to the adjoining, to the effect of the adjoining as well as the area that these establishments are in. We would like to make existing establishments easier, again, going back to what Mr. Hill had said, to come back in and to ask for whether they had dancing in the previous years, to have dancing again, whether they have had entertainment or continue to have entertainment. We'd like you to look at the existing establishments, long-term responsible establishments, to have these things. The police to have the authority to address current establishment and not conforming to code right now. We'd like that to be addressed. We don't feel that the police should, we do agree that the police should, they're out at nighttime, so they should be the enforcement. We've had code enforcement out sometimes, but it's hard because they stop work at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So the police should have, but they shouldn't have full authority. We disagree with that. There should be a public forum of people from various areas of the city that know the different areas and have a different opinion so that they could give an honest opinion, not only to the operator but to the public. The public should have the right to make the appeal as well. We think there should be more than a 10-day period we should think it should be 30 days or somewhere between 30 and 21 days for people that are out of area, that travel, or whatever.
Marcia, will you be finishing shortly?
Yes.
Your time is up.
Yes. Let me see, We would like to have the police chief have authority and a discretion, but we would also like him to have an oversight, and maybe it's not the manager, maybe it is the council, so that we could have a better venue for more than just one opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment on this item?
John Kenny, Corona Del Mar resident. I'm all in favor of basically what Nancy Gardner said. I'd like to keep, representative government, and it seems to me that this issue is getting away from representative government. Thank you.
Dan Purcell, Corona Del Mar. I would reiterate that. We need a public body to keep things accountable. I mean, my gosh, we've got nightclubs in the police department. I mean, I know they're squeaky clean. There's never a problem. But if I'm a slick nightclub owner, what do I want? One guy. We got to get that one guy. That's all we got to do. He controls everything, right? I mean, there's no public body. Now, I know we don't have a problem with that here. Not a problem whatsoever. But the pressures are there. You can't have one person running the nightclubs, and whether he likes them or not, or whatever. Thanks.
Robert Hawkins, Newport Beach, and as you know, I serve on the Planning Commission. I want to address several items. First, Mr. Hill indicated that there was concern about the use permits running with the land. I shared Councilmember Selich's entire thrust. I do believe that the Planning Commission is the appropriate body to make these initial findings. I do believe that you can separate out the two issues. If you cannot separate them out, at the Planning Commission and the City Council, then you're going to have someone like your city attorney here who will be arguing when the police chief revokes and then the city manager affirms that it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck. Look, this is the same thing as the use permit. This was a condition of our use permit. We had to go through this process to get our use permit. So we still have that right. And let's talk about the issue of that right. Because what we are doing is concentrating the investigative power, the adjudicative power, and the enforcement power in one guy. And I think that's fine for efficiency. And I think that's fine in governments not like ours. But that's not what we do. We like to have things separated. During the Fury appeal, the attorney representing Fury tried to successfully disqualified the city attorney's office, tried to disqualify the Planning Commission because of that unified item, because he believed that everybody was tainted through that process. The same objection will go through here. Let me address the specifics, because Mr. Campbell said that the police chief can't make different conditions. The use permit is the governing document, and then the permit that the police chief gives modifies those or takes off of those. But when you look at 5.25.050C, all of these are the police chief at the time of the license approval may attach additional conditions. Well, this is the part that we're talking about the conditions. So these are the conditions that the police chief can give us. But we are already talking about additional conditions. So these must be conditions which are additional to the use permit. But that's not in here. So you need to have in C some reference to the use permit, and that the police chief has no power, for instance, on, now I'm on 2 on page, handwritten page 13 of mine, hours of operation. The use permit's going to set forth hours of operation. And the use permit is going to have to say, to allow it to go to the police chief, that the hours of operation are later than 11 o'clock. If I may continue, Mr. Mayor?
By virtue of your position on the Planning Commission, that's fine with me, but do you think it will be very much later?
No. I'm just talking about the ordinance now, so I think these are important issues. So once again, we're talking about the hours of operation. So the use permit has got to exceed 11 o'clock. If the use permit does not go to 11, it ends at 11 o'clock, we don't get here. So you got to have a use permit that goes to 1 or whatever. If it goes to 1, the police chief cannot go to 2. I mean, that, because the use permit, that's the basic land use document. But if you look here on 2, on this handwritten page 13, hours of operation for the enterprise, it doesn't say anything about those being limited by the use permit. And so, to the extent you go down this road, I don't think it's wise. But to the extent you go down this road, I think you need to carefully make sure that this license does not conflict with the use permit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Bob, I have a question. You confused me.
Okay.
To go back to the Fury,
Yes.
what we're trying to do is, at least as what's proposed, is there's going to be this bifurcation, as according to our city attorney. That helps things because then we don't have...
Understood. I
But
understand.
you were suggesting that that's not the way to go, and yet, from what I understood you to say, that the whole process was challenged in the Fury situation. The Planning Commission, everybody else, was tainted. So wouldn't this avoid that situation?
No. And the reason is, let's take the analogy, because you have the police chief doing the initial intake, granting the license, then doing the enforcement intake, and then revoking the license. So from that perspective, the police chief has this inherent conflict. He's doing all this stuff and can't separate out. Because, for instance, the city council in ruling on permit revocations does not itself conduct the investigations. Staff and independent staff is supposed to conduct those investigations. And then an independent body such as yourself or the Planning Commission revokes the permit or recommends revocation.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Bob.
To the fact that the chief would be setting the standards and then enforcing them, and there's an inherent conflict and the process is tainted?
With respect to Mr. Hawkins, I disagree that creates a situation where the police chief can't act. What happened in the Fury situation, and recognizing I was not here at the time, but from what I understand with respect to it, is we're dealing with a use permit, a revocation of a use permit proceeding for a bar and restaurant nightclub situation. Their counsel was very effective in throwing a lot of muck in the way, and I frankly think our procedures would be treat that situation entirely differently at this stage, particularly with the division of authority within the office of the city attorney. That having been said, the police chief is not conflicted just because he has that authority. He can exercise that authority. It's also distinctly different than Fury because this is a license, like I said, which is a privilege and not a property right. So we're not facing the same type of due process requirements as we would face in the context of the Fury situation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In respect to Mr. Hawkins' comments on the hours of operation, if the Planning Commission sets a use permit limit at 11 o'clock, does the police chief then have the authority to extend it through the operator's permit?
No, we wouldn't want that. In fact, to address Mr. Hawkins' concern in that question, we have an additional provision we'd like to add under subsection D 525050. The sentence up here that you see, no case shall the conditions be less restricted than those required by the applicable use permit. We might even want to indicate that it not be inconsistent with or less restrictive than. So if the commission said 2 o'clock but subject to this license, then the police chief can go 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or even 11 o'clock, and have other enforcement tools as well. But if the planning commission said, well, from a land use perspective, nothing past 12 o'clock would be, anything past 12 o'clock would be detrimental to the community, the police chief would only have an hour there to play with, and he couldn't be more permissive. So our intent was not to make it more permissive. I think this language clarifies it and makes it very clear.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
so now I hear that the applicant has to go through the regular conditional use permit process and argue for their hours and their entertainment and their dance, and then turn around and start all over again and convince the police chief. I thought we were truncating one and moving to the other to make it more simple. I mean, I now see the argument, well, how do we know what the next police chief will want? Maybe we'd better keep it down to the lower level.
Well, I have a question too, because I guess as I saw this process unfolding, I thought it was going to be a little different as well. I didn't ever expect it would be funneled through the police chief's office. And I guess at its basic level, when someone comes to us for a use permit, is there some master list out there, and I'm not saying just the city's list, but a list of what the use permit has to cover? In other words, does a use permit have to grant hours of operation? Can we grant a use permit that talks nothing about hours of operation and have a separate permit where you have to go to determine your hours of operation? Or other types of restrictions or conditions that are in a use permit of the operational nature? Because that's what we really want to get at here. I mean, we can't, once we give them the right to sell liquor on a piece of property, we can't take that back. That's a use permit, that's a property right. Am I accurate in that or not? I mean, we can if we go through a series of hearings and processes.
What we're dealing with...
Not the license, but the right to use that property for liquor sales.
Can I address that by addressing like a hypothetical? The
Sure,
future business
sure.
that comes in, I'm Joe's Bar, and I
Right.
want to have a restaurant that goes past 11 o'clock, and I want to serve alcohol till 2 o'clock and have dancing.
Right.
In the context of our ordinance, where I believe we see this as functioning, is then the land use right, because that restaurant can't function in this zone without a use permit, is issued saying you can, subject to getting appropriate permits. Now, we have other appropriate permits, cafe dance permits, other things like that, operate until 2 o'clock, subject to the conditions set forth in those permits. So then yes, Councilmember Hill, you are seeing that there's a second permit that needs to be obtained, and that's from the police chief. It's not a permit, it's a license. And the purpose of that is then to set the conditions for doing a particular type of use. So I'm Joe, I can operate till 2 o'clock, but if the chief says, because you can do it till 2 o'clock and you can serve alcohol and so forth so long as you comply with these conditions, then I violate them, and the chief says, you're in violation, I'm going to take it back till 12 for the serving of alcohol, but you can continue to serve food, which of course I'll lose business on, and I won't make any money, and I'll want to stop because I'm making my money on the alcohol. But I still have the land use entitlement to function as a restaurant subject to the license that's issued by the police chief. And so we get the control in the context of the license. Am I answering your question, Council Member? That's where I see this going.
I guess what I'm saying is there a possibility to, at least with certain of these factors, to avoid the redundancy of having to say it in both places? In other words, have hours in the use permit and have hours in the operator's license. Can we just not address the hours issue of the use permit so that hours don't run with the land, and leave that to the operator's license where we can adjust the hours up and down as we feel is appropriate for that particular location, which will not run with the land, so that every operator, we can reassess what we want to do?
And we can, in the context of the authority of the Planning Commission, say because let's say you want Joe's to be next door to this condo association, and we don't want you to ever operate past 12, whether you're serving alcohol or not, and they can set those or not put that in. I think that's going to affect the operator, because we have to define sufficiently well in their use permit so it's consistent and complete. But Mr. Campbell may have another take on that.
use permits traditionally have come with hours of operation. You know, it's just been our past practice. Almost every one of them includes that.
Right, see, that's what I want to get at, but
and
that's
what I-
been our practice, but is that what the law says? A use permit has to state hours of operation?
It doesn't, and I
Okay.
think, you know, we apply conditions to address issues that we see that might result of that operation. These are the conditions upon which that we might authorize the use and make the finding that it wouldn't be detrimental to the community. So it can be dealing with trash, it can be dealing with security, it can be dealing with hours of operation, it can be dealing a whole host of operational characteristics. And it's been our practice to do that. But when we offer 2 a.m. without really any other restrictions, you know, we've conveyed a land use right, and those are difficult to alter and/or revoke. In my estimate, how we would use this is that if the commission sees fit to having a restaurant there, maybe without live entertainment, maybe without dancing, but maybe till 2 a.m. with one condition, that you get this license. And the chief of police then would have the ability to curtail it back if they run afoul of the community, if they create nuisances. And so we feel this is an effective tool. And in essence, the use permit would create an outer shell of land use privileges. But within that, it would authorize the chief of police to make certain, you know, more restrictive requirements based on how they operate. And that would be built into the land use right, and therefore wouldn't, so when we go into revoke or do other enforcement activities to apply additional conditions, you know, we're not affecting that land use right, because we're just now changing conditions for that privilege that's been granted. We feel it's an effective tool.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question of the police chief? Chief,
Certainly.
in your experience in Long Beach, did the restaurateur have to go through the full conditional use permit, including all of the elements that we're talking about of entertainment, dance, and hours, before they came to get an operational license?
Yes.
And did that ever cause, in your history there, an overburden that you felt or that you had been reported to you by the operators of being a double whammy instead of a single? I mean, did it make it twice as difficult to get it, or was the Planning Commission not as strict, or how did that work?
Not that that was ever expressed to me. No.
Well, I'm totally in support of the separation of operations from the conventional land use. And I guess where I would be, Mr. Mayor, is that if it's been tried and it worked, I would be willing to certainly try it here on the basis that I think it would work here as well.
All right, I've lost track. Are we still in public comment? I believe we are. Are there any other public comments on this item?
It's Charles Unsworth. I'm on the Planning Commission. When I first became aware of this, I did see a duck. To my way of thinking, to grant or deny a person the right to conduct a business on specified conditions such as hours of operation is more than just granting a license to operate. It requires more than paying a fee. It requires the person, department, or commission in authority to exercise discretion. It's not just a ministerial act. The citizens of Newport Beach are entitled to notice of and the right to participate in the potential exercise of that discretion. The Brown Act sets forth a procedure to call and conduct an appropriate forum in which that discretion is exercised. The police department has the ability to provide most valuable information in such a forum, and on the Planning Commission we get it all the time, and we get their conditions, and their conditions are imposed. But I don't think it's appropriate for the police department to make the rule, that is to set the hours, then adjudicate the breach of the rules, and then impose the sanction of taking away the rights given. And such a procedure is especially troublesome in the absence of compliance with the Brown Act. The efficiency of a single source of power must give way to the separation of powers as embodied in our Constitution. Thank you.
That was quite eloquent.
Hello, Mayor Henn. My name is George Schroeder, and I've been a 22-year resident of Newport Beach. I have a lot of different thoughts on liquor licenses, but I want to just stay on point tonight. Earlier, Mayor Henn mentioned if DJ should be included or not in this ordinance that you're looking at. I just wanted to say that I think a DJ in our era is a different thing than a DJ today. A DJ today with a couple of turntables and a microphone, they could have 5,000 kids show up if it's the right DJ. So if you're going to include any live entertainment, you need to include what passes for the word DJ today. And then I guess just on a side note, I have lived in Newport Beach for 22 years, and I walk my dog a lot. I'm outside. People will pull over sometimes, and they'll ask me, hey, where's Fashion Island? Sometimes they can't find that. I've been asked a lot of things over the years, but the one thing I've never, ever been asked is, where do you have to go to get a drink in this town? Okay. I mean, in Irvine, you might ask it there, and the answer is Newport Beach. So my concern is, I don't know, it seems like there's a good intention here, but there are certain parts of town where we just have an over-concentration of liquor licenses. But, right here, between here and, the pier, we have something like 88 liquor licenses, and we have more establishments than residents that can fill them. So it's good to be pro-business. I want to see them all succeed, but sometimes the best answer is don't oversaturate the marketplace. I mean, I know places where if you want to get a liquor license, you have to buy one, and it costs like $250,000 to buy a liquor license from an establishment. Instead, we just give them away here, and they do run with the land. So I'm hoping that we will think about that before we give out too many more. And I would like to see, I guess, this proceed in whichever fashion it does, where we can get a handle on the people who don't operate in the proper way. Thank you.
Do we have other public comment? If there's anybody besides this gentleman, come on down.
I felt that I've been here, so I was pretty close to one of these hearings, and I think I understand that.
Could you state your name,
I'm sorry,
please?
my name is Ali Zadeh. I'm owner of the Port Restaurant in Corona del Mar. At the same time, I serve as a Business Improvement District board member in the Corona del Mar, also a member of the board of the Restaurant Association for a couple of years in Newport Beach. A couple takes I have based on, now that we have a forum that I can kind of voice this opinion. I wasn't really decided to prepare anything, but I think kind of just want to bring a few points here. I think that having the police department in charge is definitely a good idea, because they really are the enforcement. Those are the kind of the channel that can observe and take appropriate, actions per se. And I think this is really why kind of directed toward the police department, because we have an issue right now in the city in certain areas. And I think not to impose this one for new businesses, but rather if you have some sort of like a overall thinking as far as how to clean up existing acts, because it's going to take about maybe 200 years for us to get all these new places. But right now, if you have an issue, we have a overcapacity issue in certain areas. We have, not because of those operators are doing good jobs, because these rights are vested into them to be able to do stuff, and doesn't provide that kind of consistency, as I feel, in the city. I think the situation as far as the permit process should be easier, because we felt it as a business. We have to go through it. It was not pretty. We suffered a lot. But at the same time, I do understand that the needs of a business needs to be discussed with members of the city, the staff, a lot more in collaboration and trying to figure things out, and why these requests are out there to begin with, to improve business. And I think those facts needs to be considered and looked at before we proceed with any kind of a changing in laws as the way it is. But I do understand where this process can make life easier down the line if it is consistently applied throughout. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for final discussion and a motion.
I'll make a motion. I propose the action with the following changes. that we add the language B that you provided to us, but that it be 14 days of notice instead of 10, as suggested by the mayor. That on D, we add the the language that you also did that. That we add the ability of the public to appeal, and that the appeal go to the city council instead of the city manager.
Yeah, I'll second that. I really like the concept that the operator's license wouldn't run with the land, and, we would have, depending on the next operator, deal with it separately. And certainly the police chief has really broad authorities here, the hours of operation, imposing security, types of things that could be costly. So I appreciate the testimony by the planning commissioners, and also believe that we need to maintain our representative government and make sure that it's still appealable to the city council. So I would second your motion.
Okay, in reading this a little more closely, it says that the notice period that was 10 days in here, I suggested 14 days, but in reading it more closely, the comment that's being solicited is written comment. And so I'm wondering if really 21 days would be more appropriate than 14 days.
That's fine.
In view of that.
Change that.
Do any other council members have comment based on the motion presented?
Why 21 days?
Because it's not an in-person hearing, so you'd have to mail out the notice, and some people would write a comment and mail it back. 14 days is fairly tight, it seems to me, in that circumstance. Any other comments on the part of council? Councilman Hill?
Could we take a straw vote on the appeal issue?
Well, I think if any of us feel differently about the issue of it being appealed straight to the city council, you certainly can offer an amendment to the motion. Did you wish to do that? Actually, I do. I offer an amendment to the motion that the appeal be as originally presented to the city manager.
I would second that motion.
So we have an amendment. I'm presuming that the author of the motion would not accept that amendment.
You imagine, right?
All right. Do we have any discussion on the amendment? Failing any discussion.
I'll just make a quick comment here. Some of what the planning commissioner said resonates with me. I do have a certain uncomfortable feeling about putting all this responsibility just on the police department. Ultimately, city manager would, I guess, hear the final appeal on it. So they're not the final authority at the police department. But I think to the extent that, we do want to keep the two processes separate, I would take the advice of the city attorney here, and I guess we could give it a shot. Personally, I would have liked to have seen it more along the lines of not so much going into the police department, but going through the use permit or the planning department process. However, again, in my mind, it was somehow we were going to carve out the issues that we were most concerned about that didn't have to run with the land, and separate those out of a use permit, and maybe say in the use permit subject to obtaining this operator's license, which would cover those things, and that could be handled in a different matter, and not be part of the use permit itself, which runs with the land and has a much higher burden of overcoming, but something where we could make those adjustments as needed without that higher burden of proof. Barring being able to do that or seeing, us being able to do that in the near future, I'll support the alternative motion or the mayor's motion, but I would have preferred to have seen it that way, I guess.
The reason I offered that amendment is that we can change it if it's a problem. This is not hard to change, right? And it is the most legally defensible separate mechanism. I'm willing to give it a try here based upon the chief's commentary at the hearing.
You can also change city managers if it's a problem.
Yeah, well, I'm on the fence on the appeal issue. That's why I didn't offer an amendment to the motion. But I guess in the big picture here that I think protecting the ordinance is maybe more important than an appeal process. And if it doesn't work, we can change it. But I would really be concerned if we started granting operator permits and some sharp attorney got out there and started overturning them in court, then they become land use permits and we didn't intend it to be a land use permit. And that seems to me to be a bigger danger than anything here. So I guess I'll be supporting the amendment.
Any further comment?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I might just to clarify, the amendment is as stated by the original motion with the change of the appellate to the city manager as proposed, so it includes all the other items?
Correct. 21 days, yes,
21
all the
days.
other items. The only change being the appeal.
Thank you.
So, Councilman Rosansky, did you have another comment?
No,
Okay, well then, so the motion under consideration here is the amendment, which changes the original motion such that the appeal goes to the city manager and not city council. Please vote.
With Mayor Pro Tem Gardner and Councilmember Daigle voting no, the motion carries.
And I believe there's no further motion or vote required.
And as a reminder to the public, this comes back to you in its cleaned-up form as passed today for second reading at your next meeting.
And these changes, city attorney, that's fine if it comes back like...
Your direction's clear. This is effective first reading. We'll bring it back for second reading.
Okay, well, that's another easy one. We're still on items pulled from the consent calendar, and I have here item 9.
Yes, would you like a little, can we add something here?
Well, you know, you were the one that pulled it,
Yeah.
right? So can you
Yeah.
just introduce it, and then we'll...
Sure. With these grants, you know, the city used to have a policy. We didn't apply for any grants because of the kind of the strings attached. And with some of these grants, we are enticed to do things that we're not currently doing, and then we're partially reimbursed. And with this one, it proposes an agreement with a county, who's an arm of the state, their healthcare agency, and it's one of the optional items, and I pointed out because it's optional that we provide flu shots. And the fact is, you can get a flu shot at the pharmacy for $5. You can go to CVS or Walgreens, or if you're on Medicare, you can go to a doctor and get a flu shot for free. And I know in Hogue, Irvine, I think we used to have it in Newport, they even have sort of a drive-through shooting. You can get your flu shot through that way. So I'm wondering, in the optional item of the fire department, offering flu shots, if we really need to sort of have a pharmacy dimension to our fire department.
Councilmember Daigle, may have Fire Chief Morgan respond, but just so you know, the intent of this action is to only activate this in the event that there's an emergency relating to a flu pandemic. But
the exercise that you were referring to with regard to the flu shots is, as a test of these pods, we would have the option to utilize the flu shot procedure as a test or as an exercise or as a drill in utilizing the pods. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just feel that getting into flu shots might be, that's just my opinion, but others may differ.
All right. Do we have public comment on this item? Seeing none, we've moved approval. Has there a second?
Second.
Let's please vote.
With Councilmember Daigle voting no, the motion carries.
All right. I pulled item number 10. This has to do with the contract for management of the Balboa Yacht Basin. And I guess my feeling, the reason I pulled it is that I would like to include with this a request that staff put together a capital improvements program at a maximum amount of $50,000 for the next 2 years for capital improvements at the Balboa Yacht Basin, going beyond the maintenance items that are called out in the staff report. So I would move approval of this item with that additional provision.
Second.
Are you saying that they come up with a plan or authorize the $50,000 tonight?
Propose a plan for capital improvements to be included in the budget for fiscal 11-12.
And just to clarify, it's not necessarily something that Dave New would do. It's something that potentially someone else might do, or Dave might do it if it's low bid.
That's correct, but it would be included in the budget item for fiscal 11-12, still subject to council consideration of the specifics.
All right, I mean, I personally, I support it. I don't know that it needs to be in the context of voting on this contract, but I do support the recommendation.
Okay, any further council comment? Do we have any public comment on that? Seeing none, please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
I think that's the last item in the consent calendar.
You're off to a roaring start.
Boy, I'll tell you.
Can we have a 10-minute break? No.
I don't even know what item we're up to, 23. So we are now in the, oh, that's right. Thank you. We are now, it's now time for oral reports on committee activities from council members. Councilmember Daigle.
None?
No report.
Councilmember Curry, Councilmember Selich.
None.
Councilmember Hill.
None. Hill's not on a committee yet. We didn't vote on that part yet.
Well, and that.
Oh, is that what, oh, okay, I guess we
He
did.
can still
Sorry.
comment if he wishes.
None,
Councilmember
thank
Rosansky.
you. None, thank you.
Councilmember Gardner.
Yes, the bike committee is just going great guns. We had a terrific report from the police chief at our last meeting talking about the bike-related issues that are on the police department's agenda for this year, and a number of safety issues. There'll be more rodeos with schools and everything, so we're extremely pleased with that. And we are going to be doing an outreach program to get public reaction to the idea of putting sharrows, those are the paintings on the ground that are like on Bayside Drive, that remind both cyclists and motorists that they are to share the road, and this would be on PCH through Corona Del Mar. That's just a proposal, as I say. We're looking for public reaction, and we'll be doing that in the next few months. Thank you.
I have a quick report on the Finance Committee meeting that was held yesterday. We covered a number of subjects, one of which was the pension valuation as of June 30th of 2009, the most recently available actuarial valuation of pension liabilities, and there's no good news in that report. That report is basically dated at probably the worst possible measurement date, and it showed significant deterioration in the city's funded status for both safety and miscellaneous, as well as significant adverse change ahead of us in terms of our pension accrual rates. But the main purpose of the conversation was to discuss with the actuary ideas about what the city can do to try to control those adverse changes. And so we had a very good discussion in that respect, and we'll certainly be continuing that discussion as we look for ways to manage that cost. We also talked about investment manager recommendations. We currently have 5 investment managers, and it appears to be quite a cost-effective decision to drop down to 3 based on reduced costs for the 3 bidders that remain, all of whom have also produced relatively good investment results. And we talked about the request for proposal regarding the governance of our parking citywide, with the possible exception of 2 of our pay lots. That RFQ is proceeding quite well and will mature to council consideration, I suppose, in a few months, April perhaps. And it is likely to show a substantial savings, both one-time and ongoing, on behalf of the city. We also talked about revenue trends, and I'm happy to report that the latest estimates of our revenues are consistent, perhaps somewhat ahead of what we had in our budget. So it does not look like we're in for any negative surprises on, against our budget on our revenue expectations, and that's certainly good news. And then it looks like the governor's proposed changes in the state budget are going to have very limited impact on our city, at least as proposed. Perhaps an impact with relation to funding for our library, which is certainly something near and dear to our hearts. But we'll have to figure out how to deal with that. But other than that, it doesn't appear that there's much impact on the city of Newport Beach, and that's certainly good news as well.
What's the potential dollar impact on the library?
$350,000.
So not inconsequential. So that's on a total budget of around $7 million?
About 6-8, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's it for committee reports. Now it's on to item number 23, which is the Newport Business Plaza.
Mr. Mayor and council members, this is a public hearing, a reopened public hearing. We have, we can make a staff report about it, but because you've heard this item a couple of times, I think the focus of it, as I understand it from council, the focus of your interest, is whether to do a development agreement or whether to adopt findings associated with a waiver of the development agreement. So I'd probably like to hear briefly from you if you'd like to hear a short staff report versus if you just want to get into that discussion of the development agreement.
I don't need to hear it reported. I read it. I suppose everybody else did.
I don't.
Yeah, I'd like to learn a little bit more about development agreements. Maybe you can educate us a little bit more as to, you know, what they're about and when they're supposed to apply.
Okay, I'll have Jim Campbell then do that.
Yeah, I'll start in on that. Here in Newport Beach, we have the general plan. It establishes two policies, one for the airport area and one for Newport Center, and those policies mandate development agreements to be entered into for residential or mixed-use development. The only other area that the city required development agreements in the past was in the context of timeshare projects. And typically this is a mutually, two parties come to an agreement. The developer is looking for a long-term they get investing with that development agreement. These are typically for larger projects, maybe multi-phased over multi-years, and so they're really immune from changes in development standards, if you will. And so typically on a larger project that is multi-year, developers are seeking these things. And in some smaller projects, like the one here this evening, the developer is not seeking that privilege. And to get back to our ordinance, we did amend the ordinance after the general plan update that provided some additional requirements. At the time, the General Plan Implementation Committee felt that it was important to add some additional requirements. The council endorsed that, of course, through the amendment in 2007. To go a little beyond the general plan, it also requires a development agreement for any legislative act for 50 or more units. So if we're doing a code amendment or a general plan amendment to increase the density, or I would say maybe doing a land use change to put new residential in an area of 50 or more, it would be required. Also be mandated for any residential development in the Mariners Mile area. Again, that's in context with a general plan amendment or a code amendment. So this is something allowing entitlement beyond the general plan. In addition to that, it would be new non-residential development in the airport area, in the North Fort area, as well as in Newport Center. And those three examples are ones that are not mandated by the general plan. Now, in 2007, when these provisions were added, the council also added a provision for a waiver. And those actually, we've got, not even going with my presentation here, but on the board, the council can waive the development agreement requirement. First off, maybe go to the footnote. You can't waive it when the general plan requires it. So in this case, residential development in Newport Center and residential development in the airport area. But those other projects I mentioned could be waived if the council felt that they were minor in nature, they provided significant public benefits to the city without the development agreement, or the nature of the project is such that neither the city nor the developer would benefit from the development agreement. So in order to waive, the council needs to make one of these three findings. In the staff report, we've articulated some facts that might support any one of these findings or even all three of them. And I think the question that we're looking for today is, you know, does the council want to waive it in this case? And if the council does want to waive it, I think in looking at the facts in the staff report, if you folks could help us articulate the reasons why we wouldn't want to in the light of the information in the report, that would be helpful for the record. But if the council is a consensus to require the development agreement, it would also be helpful to provide direction to staff as we go forth and negotiate the development agreement. We provided a list of some possible development points in there. And just to kind of come full circle on this, should the council actually require the development agreement, what we'll end up doing is not taking action on the project this evening and maybe holding that off. We would go back and negotiate the agreement and then bring that agreement to the Planning Commission. That's required by ordinance, and then bring it back to the City Council at a future meeting. So I suppose we might just take this in steps, start with the development agreement, make that decision. If we want to do it, then we'll go forth and negotiate that and come back. If the council chooses not to waive it, staff is recommending that, well, once that decision is made, then our recommendation is to introduce the ordinance and adopt the resolution approving the project. Now, Ms. Brown is here to go over the project if you want. Again, this is really a general plan amendment for 11,500 square feet of additional entitlement up in the airport area at the corner of Campus and Jamboree, and it would result in the redevelopment of that site. There's existing 35,000 square foot building would be taken down, and we'd see a new development. So we can go through the particulars of that if you want. Staff is available to assist you through the discussion if you need it.
Okay. That's all right. Did it?
Have there been, yes, thank you, that was a very thorough answer to my question. Have there been projects that were more substantial than this proposed project where there was no development agreement?
Through the history of the city, there's been many projects that have gone through that are much larger than the project before us that have not required a development agreement. A more recent example, we're actually in plan check now, is maybe the Newport Bay Marina project. The Planning Commission approved 27 residential units, 36,000 square feet of commercial, and this is redevelopment of 2.5 acres right next to the crab cooker. You know, the city's also considered other projects in the Mariners Mile area. Most recently, approval of a 55,000 square foot development by the Planning Commission at Dover. That project didn't come to fruition, but that project didn't require a development agreement. We've done a general plan amendment more recently up on Old Newport Boulevard of a similar size to this project. The amendment was a little bit larger. I believe it was 12,000 square feet, but it didn't require a development agreement. And principally, it didn't require them because the ordinance doesn't require them, and the developer wasn't seeking the assurance of a development agreement.
Councilmember Gardner.
Question on page 4, bullet point 2. That says these fees would offset a portion of improvements to the circulation system necessary to accommodate traffic volume generated by the project. Is this the norm? Do we usually demand that they cover all of the costs of to accommodate traffic volume, or is it usually a portion of the cost?
This is in reference to the fair share fee? Yeah, this is a requirement by the ordinance today, so the increased traffic, there is a per-trip fee that's assessed, and that does go into the funds to offset other general plan improvements in the area. It's required of any project, regardless of the development agreement.
Okay, so this is just the norm. It's
we just
neither
wanted to
more nor
include-
less than what we would normally require.
We would normally get that fee.
And then it said the fee, over on page 6, the first paragraph, the fee could offset increased public expenses, future improvements, and/or incremental increase in cost attributable to the project. Have we put a number on those?
No, I think that is in reference to a fee that the council has assessed through other development agreement negotiations. They've negotiated type fees through Hogue and through others that are pending. Again, this would just be a development fee to offset those other incremental costs. There
This is
really
an
is no dollar
example,
figure
this
to
sort
it.
of
It's
thing
just
we
an
might.
example.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councilman Rosansky.
Well, not so much a question. I just like to get to the meat of this thing. We've seen it before, and it's come back now with the same basic recommendation that we had the last time we looked at it. And I guess I still maintain the same position that the ordinance does allow for a development agreement. The justifications that you have up here about minor in nature, I don't think it's minor in nature. I think it's 11,000 square feet. It increases the project by 33 or 34%, which I think is fairly significant in nature. You cite to the green light ordinance, but I don't really think that that's pertinent here. Green light is one thing, and this is another. About the project provides significant public benefits to the city. You list a number of them here, but as you just said with the fair share fee, and I think most if not all these things would apply to any project in the city where you're doing an infill type development, and that we would get these fees regardless of where it is in the city. And the nature of the project is such that neither the city nor the developer would benefit from the development agreement. Well, I don't think that's the case, because I think if we had a development agreement, that the city could benefit from that, and so I don't know how we would make that determination either. And so I look at what we've done in other areas of the city where we have the same exact provision, or other areas of the city where we didn't. I mean, we extracted $3 million from Hoag Hospital, and they didn't get one additional square foot. Under your 40,000 square foot rule, that we should have asked them for the $3 million. And all they did was move square footage around their property from the lower campus to the upper campus. We negotiated an agreement with the Hyatt Hotel. They were going to pay us money. Unfortunately, that project has gone away because of other reasons other than our development agreement. We're talking with two landowners in Newport Center that I would argue are going to provide more significant benefit to the city than this project ever will, and they're going to pay developer agreement fees. And so, I don't think that we're going to overburden these folks with either conditions under a development agreement and or fees, but I think that we are giving them a valuable right. They're going to build an additional 11,000 square feet there. My rough calculation of it, if you had a park office space at 4 to 1, you need almost an acre of land to build 11,000 square feet, and in that corner, an acre of land's got to be worth a couple $1 million. Easy. We're paying that down the street and then some for a little strip of property that we're taking off of a landscape, landscaping of the parkway, right? Exactly. So they're basically getting a $2 million windfall here, and to ask them to enter into a development agreement with the city, and I don't think it's asking too much. I think it makes it consistent with the other development agreements that we've been negotiating around town and that are under the same restriction as they are. And I just don't see the inconsistency in it. I would, if you're asking for my direction is that we do enter into a development agreement.
Councilman Selich?
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Rosansky. And looking at the findings that are up on the screen there, I don't see where I can make those findings on this particular project. It says the legislative act is of a minor nature. We've never really defined what a minor nature is in any quantitative way. If it was a 3,000 square foot addition to a lobby or circulation space or something like that, I might be more inclined to find it being of a minor nature, but it isn't. As Councilmember Rosansky said, it's about 1/3 of the space of the building that's being increased. So I think you have to take the percentage aspect into account on it. It is in an area that requires a development agreement. A number of the projects that Mr. Campbell mentioned were not in areas that required a development agreement. The project provides significant public benefits to the city. I don't see where this project's providing significant public benefits to the city above and beyond the basic things that would be required no matter where this project was located in the city, whether it was in a development agreement area or not. And then the nature of the project is such that neither the city nor the developer would benefit from a development agreement. I can't make that finding either. So from my standpoint, I am not inclined to grant a waiver for the development agreement.
Councilman Daigle?
Yeah, I appreciate those points, and I think, part of it, too, is people feel that they have to negotiate with other property owners, and, there would seem to be some inconsistency as far as who gets waivers and who doesn't. And, I think if you look at that inconsistency, too, if you look, for example, at the Schulian project, they didn't have a development agreement, yet, they were really granted a greater windfall of square footage. So I think you'd have to look at that. And then also, the analysis for a development agreement, it doesn't really include, well, if they're making profit and there's some type of surplus, then the city deserves some of that. I think it's more along the lines of the, the findings that the staff pointed out. And I would see public benefit along the lines of, it's a gateway project, it's a revitalization of an area that's been kind of run down. So I would see that as an important public benefit. So I do appreciate your points. I think there's been inconsistencies with the development agreements, and I'd be interested, too, in hearing from the applicant.
Well, I'll just make one comment. We do have, I don't know if the proper term is inequities, but certain areas of the city are required to have development agreements, other areas of the city aren't. I mean, we created that knowingly when we put those provisions in the general plan.
And as well, the one project you did note, the Shuley project, yes, we did actually give them a general plan amendment and increased square footage, but they also gave up something very significant, which was access off of the back property, which abutted a residential neighborhood, which at least at the time I felt was a pretty important give up. They could have had a much different project there that would have impacted the neighborhood a lot more significantly. And there is no development agreement requirement for that property. So not to say, if there had been, maybe there might have been a different story. There may have been a development agreement there, but we had no right to ask for one at that point.
Why don't we hear from the applicant?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Meg Shockley, and I represent WPI Newport, LLC. We understand some of the council members' concerns with applying the development agreement waiver to a particular project. But the fact is that a waiver is appropriate here, not only because of the plain meaning of the municipal code, but it is also consistent with the city's handling of other projects to date. It is also important to note, as Mr. Campbell did, that a development agreement is not required by the general plan policies. In applying municipal code section 1545 to this project, the 3 specified waiver exceptions are clearly satisfied. And as you know, only one exception needs to be found to justify a waiver. The project is minor in nature based on existing law and other city projects. The determination of what is minor is left to the city's interpretation. This application is minor in nature not only because it does not change any general plan land use designation, and it does not change the property development rights, but also because the scope and square footage involved are significantly less than other projects for which a development agreement has been used, such as a library, circulation improvement and open space agreement, Pacific View Memorial Park, Ford, and Fletcher Jones, just to name a few. Per the original general plan that's been in place for several years, decades, owner is already entitled to 34,500 square feet. This application only seeks an increase of 11,544. In addition, using existing law as a reference point, this project is deemed minor by Charter Section 423 green light. In fact, it falls far below that threshold, which has been used several times by the city. The project also provides significant public benefits to the city. For example, the Planning Commission found the project to be consistent with the general plan policies, including LU 3.2, which encourages the enhancement of existing neighborhoods, districts, and corridors. As stated in Resolution 1816, redevelopment of the existing underperforming site in a single phase. From the owner's perspective, the requested square footage just barely makes this redevelopment project economically feasible to this important corner. And, as probably most noticeable to the public, this project would create strong architectural presence and enhance this prominent intersection, which is the gateway to Newport Beach. This project would also be adequately served by existing public facilities and infrastructure. No new public services or utilities would be required. The project would also generate increased property tax revenue to the city. The local economy would benefit from new jobs in construction, banking, and professional and general office. In order to increase the project's marketability in this difficult economy, the owners have also agreed recently to build this building with LEED certification, increasing the construction costs significantly. And lastly, after reviewing page 5 of the staff report recently, applicant would be willing to voluntarily incorporate into this project 2 additional public benefits at applicant's sole expense: the enhancement aesthetic improvements to the surrounding pedestrian easements, installation of non-standard sidewalks, pavers, and landscaping, and replacement of the existing street trees along campus and Jamboree, per the staff report. In applying the third criteria, neither the city nor the owner would benefit from a development agreement. This application concerns a relatively small increase in square footage that is needed to redevelop an underperforming building in one construction phase, quick phase. This project is of a small scale with simple, short timing, in stark contrast to the other city projects that have incorporated a development agreement. In addition to those already mentioned, staff report attachment CC4 lists several others. A development agreement would substantially harm owner in this case also, due to the additional time and cost involved in new environmental studies, new plans, handling the agreement's administration, and then, after public notice timeframe for the environmental review, going back to the Planning Commission after we received unanimous approval on this project in August, and then finally back to Council. The timing has recently become more urgent because after 6 years of no serious interest from any potential tenants for this property, depending on owner's ability to proceed and deliver the project in a timely manner, they may be able to work out a deal with a national credit tenant. In the past several years, with their GPA pending, it has been actually impossible to enter into any long-term agreements with any end users for any portion of the property. A further delay at this point would substantially harm the applicant. In sum, applicant respectfully submits that all 3 of the waiver provisions are satisfied by the facts in this application. However, if the City Council can reasonably apply even one of these waiver justifications, then the Council may properly waive the need for a development agreement. And finally, there is also an equitable argument in furtherance of this application. WPI Newport first filed this general plan amendment application for this site in 2005 and has been working with the city ever since.
Will you be finishing very
Yes.
shortly here?
3 more paragraphs. Sorry.
3 more paragraphs?
Look, quick. Blurbs, bullet points.
Why don't you, okay, go ahead.
Very quick. We had plans, studies, and reports prepared and had made progress with the city processing and the PC text required reviews and comment procedures. However, each draft of the general plan update chipped away at our proposed project until we had to start completely from scratch. Applicant proceeded to plan and design a new project in compliance with the uses and development standards allowed in the new general plan. Shortly after the passing of the general plan update, the coal company proposed a general plan amendment where they got 24,000 square feet, wiping out half of our proposed square feet for our proposed project. Finally, and most recently, continuing owners' interest in cooperation, WPI Newport agreed to reduce its project square footage even further by almost half, again, to accommodate another project in the same statistical area, in the interest of being cooperative and working with the city because we really want this project to proceed. WPI Newport has invested tens of thousands of dollars per year in architectural costs alone, resulting from project plan changes since 2005. This has been an extremely expensive prospect, and there has been no windfall even close to date on this project. In conclusion, WPI Newport is willing to proceed with the proposed redevelopment project to improve this important Newport Beach Gateway area. We respectfully ask the City Council to accept the planning staff's recommendation of a waiver per Municipal Code 1545. Thank you very much.
Don't go away.
Can
Councilman Curry?
ask staff, if we decide we're going to move forward with the development agreement, does that send these folks back through the environmental process once again?
Really would depend upon the nature of the terms of the development agreement. If those would necessitate or create a physical change to the environment, we would need to conduct some additional analysis to see if it's covered by the existing document or maybe some subsequent document. If there are no physical changes to the environment, then it would be exempt.
Well, and there's a hearing process, however, involved with the development agreement?
Yes, the development agreement, the municipal code requires the planning commission's input in a hearing, and we would negotiate the agreement, then go back to the planning commission, obviously conduct that additional environmental analysis if necessary based on the terms of the agreement, and then bring it back to council.
Do you have an estimate of the cost of these 3 items that you're volunteering to do?
No, sir. We just saw that in the staff report recently and have not had a chance to meet with experts unless the principal is here who's done quite a bit of construction, and perhaps he could opine on that if you would like.
The city doesn't have a view of an estimate of what the value of those items is?
No, we don't. This was just a list here prepared of additional enhancements that the city could negotiate for as part of the development agreement. We just wanted to put that there for your consideration.
But our understanding, Mayor, would be it would be tearing out all the surrounding sidewalks, tearing out all regrading. This is a huge amount of work, but it's okay because that's fine. They're willing to do that. We've had a long conversation. They're willing to do that. Extremely expensive. And all the nice paving on the sidewalks and a lot of construction and a lot of work, but it can be done quickly and efficiently.
Okay. Councilman Gardner?
I agree with both Councilmen Rosansky and Selich about the development agreement, with the understanding that development agreements all differ. I mean, if we're dealing with Irvine Company and 800 units, then you get quite a lot of benefit. With a small project, you get smaller ones. And I was thinking that if there were a development agreement, it would include some of these items that staff suggested. Now that the project proponent has offered to do these, I'm content. I think we've gotten our something extra that is of benefit, and I'm certainly willing now to waive a development agreement requirement.
Councilman Curry?
May I ask the applicant, if we were to not move forward with the development agreement, would your client be amenable to also picking up the immediate improvements and the changing out the streetlight heads?
We talked about that, and it would depend on the feasibility of that as far as from the city's perspective. This is
John Young, one of the owners. We weren't really sure if you did the lights just in front of our property, and if you went LED, you would probably have a different shadowing effect, and I'm not sure the city wants to spot change heads.
Right.
Unless they were willing to do the heads all up and down Jamboree at the same time.
We're doing it in a lot of places. Do we have a viewpoint on that, staff?
Go ahead, Jim.
I think through the negotiation process, we can kind of hammer these things out, but I think if the council's looking to get a commitment here tonight to proceed, I think we would be looking at just in front of their property.
Right.
That was kind of what we were envisioning.
I would think so.
And I think the feasibility of that kind of change out, we'd have to work with Public Works to see if that works.
Maybe something we wouldn't even want.
And that's indeed right.
I mean, we would change the heads in the front of our property if that's what you wanted, but I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, with that understanding, I think I agree with Councilmember Gardner that I think we've pretty well gotten here the things of value that we could get to a development agreement other than just cash, and I'm not sure that we need to.
I can show you the
cash
pro
in
forma.
process.
We're just getting our money back of what we're putting in. That's the only reason we're doing it.
Councilman Selich?
Yeah, can you give us an idea of what the value of the improvements that she mentioned?
I don't know how many square feet. We just agreed to do that tonight. After reading these, we looked at this and said, well, let's do that. I'm really not sure. It could be 50,000 or 100,000, somewhere in that range.
And just to review, it's the first 4 items, the first 4 bullet points?
The one that starts with the word enhanced, or the one that starts with the word replacement?
Yeah, I only heard 2 the first time.
So the improvements to the median and island was not included in your offer?
That was not. Again, we wasn't sure. The median that's out there, it's Jamboree's a pretty busy road. Do you mean to tear out some more concrete and put in more planting? Or?
Yeah, let me explain what this is. That there's basically a little pork chop right there at the corner. We're not talking about the medians in the center of the street. It's a very small little pork chop there where there's a free right turn from campus to Jamboree South. It would be to enhance that in a way that would provide better pedestrian experience, a little more safety. It's
if that's
not
what
a
you
very
meant,
large. It's just that little pork
That's
chop.
no problem. We'll do that. Bus stop, I think you mentioned a bus stop or something. I looked at the bus stop. The only one I saw was on campus.
Okay. Absent any further council comment, we probably ought to ask for public comment on this. Are there any public comments? No. Then let's bring it back to council for final consideration here.
Could we have a recap of what they've agreed to do? I lost track there.
It's the first 4 bullet points, as I understand
four.
it. Subject to Public Works'
Right.
conclusions about what's appropriate.
They don't have to suddenly replace all the lights in the airport area.
Mr. Harmon's not here, but he would probably assert that the 3rd bullet, it should be our standard tree size that this would be subject to instead of a particularly tiny tree or particularly large tree. And then again, clarification on the streetlight heads that it's right in front, assuming Public Works agrees, and I think they would, as if the circuit works correctly, but we'll always take the opportunity to switch out to LED where we can.
I think actually all 4 of these should be subject to review and approval of Public Works, as to the finished quality of the work.
Are you talking about the streetlight head that's like right on their corner, or the 4 that govern that intersection? The 4. I mean, there's probably a lot of streetlight heads there.
What we were envisioning was really the street lights that really are along the frontage, along campus and along Jamboree, but not beyond their frontage and not on the other side of the street. That was what we were intending here. Again, we offered this list without all this clarification because we didn't expect to jump on it here, but apologize for that, but we were considering, standard street trees in accordance with, our established ordinances, so that we weren't thinking of larger trees, if you will, although they can propose them, and it might be nice.
Well, I think part of the problem here is this was just meant as a general list and not as a kind of real definition of exactly what they were supposed to do. Is that accurate?
Precisely. This was, in essence, if the council didn't want to do a development agreement and asked us to go negotiate that, then we would put a little
Right,
more
and so there would be a little
specificity
bit
here.
more dressing on these recommendations than what you have here.
Yeah, I think that's what we're doing here, to maybe provide some minimum
All right,
standards. for
then
you.
I'll make this proposal. Because basically, this is the benefit that we're looking for. So if they're willing to give us benefit, I hesitate, as Councilman Curry mentioned earlier, and we talked about it with the dogs, doing this on the fly here. What I would say is continue this to January 25th, with you coming back with probably more robust recommendations along these lines that we could adopt as part of the approval, if that's possible. That'll serve, in my mind, as a de facto development agreement.
Yeah.
I guess I can be satisfied.
Well,
with that.
I'd prefer to see, I would be, let's see how the other council feels. I would be comfortable approving the recommendations of staff, and then, subject to the review and approval of Public Works, those benefits that are, we are having very long meetings. I think we can
No,
make it work with those.
I would agree. I don't know why we need to keep it another 2 weeks.
I would agree with that point of view.
Okay, so that would be a motion if there's a second.
Yes, second.
Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor. And the motion is
Approval for recommendations of staff, and
to
then.
waive the development agreement
Right, and there's an
requirement.
ordinance, and there's a draft resolution, those three recommendations, and then with regards to the items on page 5, subject to the review and approval of Public Works.
And it's the
Those
top
ordinance.
4 on that
I'm sorry,
list.
top 4, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would totally agree with that. I think that's an excellent compromise. I don't know if it's independent of this or not, nothing to do with that particular project, but I think it would be appropriate for the council to further define a policy of what I would call the gray area of a development agreement, when it might be waived. And I think to have a definition of minor nature might be appropriate.
Councilman Selich?
Yeah, I guess I'll support the motion. I'm a little reluctant to do it because, in a more perfect setting, I prefer Councilman Rosansky's approach to bring these back with a little bit more definition to them. But just looking at them intuitively, I can, just take a look at the size of the site, I kind of come in my own mind the magnitude of the cost that the developer's going to incur here. So I think they're in line with the project, but I'd feel more comfortable if we had some dollar numbers attached to them. But reluctantly, I'll be supporting the motion.
Councilman Rosansky, did you have any further comment?
No further comment.
I think it's time to vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. We're up to item number 24. We're up for an easy one here.
Deal.
Move the item.
We do have a public hearing, but yeah, it can go quickly.
What is the minimum amount of procedure that we need to engage in here with regard to item number 24?
Certainly open the public hearing, and I'll just note for the record, this is an item relating to the Hoag Memorial Hospital Presbyterian Series 2011 Healthcare Facility Revenue Bonds. Staff is here, as is the applicant, in case you have questions about it.
Does anyone on council care to hear a staff report on this?
Waive the report.
No, but I do think it's important to note, for those who may not have read the report, that the city is not responsible for these bonds. We're not on the line for anything, so.
Does the applicant care to make a presentation regarding this?
I hope that would exclude reading the 1,000-page report.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Dennis O'Neill. I do represent Hoag Hospital, the applicant, and we urge your approval of the staff's recommendation. We are here with our consultant team. If you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Note, too, that this did go to the Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee's recommendation, I believe, was to, a recommendation to the council to approve.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I suggest we move the action.
Second.
Do we have public comment on this item? Seeing none, back to council, let's vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
You finally got the hang of things.
Okay. We are now up to item number 25, adoption of fire codes, and I'm wondering if we can
Take
consider
them
items
together.
25 and 26 together.
That's probably reasonable, yes. How about, I guess the staff presentation might apply to 25 and 26 and questions, and then, and maybe the public hearing, and you could certainly
We
pick them
can
up
vote
individually.
on them separately if you'd prefer, and then we'll just have a single. Okay, let's roll.
Why don't you do the presentation that outlines the areas that we know that there are significant discussion about, as well as your proposed amendment?
Great. Thank you. Mayor Henn, members of the City Council, we appreciate the opportunity to be here to give you background information about the building and fire codes, and certainly to answer any questions you might have. And I would like to start out by addressing, in particular, the sprinkler addition and reconstruction issue, because I know that some of you have had questions in the past about that. You know, for some very brief background, on November 23rd, the City Council did unanimously approve the state-mandated building and fire codes with the added provision, the continued prohibition of wood roofs within high fire hazard severity zones. And you did continue or table the discussion of the local amendments that are the subject of tonight's hearing until there could be a public workshop so that the public could be fully informed of all of the proposed local amendments. We did send out a notification to 180 people that might potentially be interested. We notified architects, design professionals, people that had pending and potential future projects, and other potential interested members of the public. We asked for their input and comments, and we also invited them to attend a public workshop. The public workshop was held on December 2nd here in the council chambers. We had 16, in addition to a number of staff people that were in attendance, we had 16 people from the public, and we gave presentations on both the building and fire code local amendments, and also entertained a question and answer session. A number of the people that were in attendance did specifically thank us for the opportunity to hear those local amendments, and so I think that the council's idea to incorporate this in future building code amendment processes was a good one. The day after that workshop, we did receive a letter from the BIA, and they did endorse and support all of the local amendments that were being proposed by staff, and a copy of that letter is included within your City Council packet. Before today, we had not received any correspondence specifically asking us to amend or change any of the local amendments, but I do want to mention particularly the email that we received today, because it does affect an amended recommendation that we have before you this evening. We were forwarded an email from Brian Jeanette, who did attend the workshop, I might add, and did at the workshop ask questions about the sprinkler requirements. His email today notes that he disagreed with the recommendation for a 2,000 square foot threshold that triggers sprinklers for additions and reconstructions. And staff did contact Brian this afternoon, because in the email he also noted that the provision could be expensive for some remodels and difficult for sprinkler installation, and certainly that was not staff's intent. So we contacted him this afternoon, and while staff believed and believes that the 2,000 square foot threshold quite adequately protects the small, medium, and frankly, quite large additions from not having triggering the sprinkler requirements. Brian pointed out that for very large homes, like, for example, a 7,000 square foot home that had a 2,000 square foot addition, it may not impact the main structure significantly and could have a cost increase for the sprinklers. And we agree with that. And that was not staff's intention. And consequently, we are amending our recommendation on that provision this evening. And our suggestion to you is that the 2,000 square foot threshold have an addition, that in addition it has to equal or exceed 50% of the square footage size of the existing structure. That will ensure that there will be that the requirement will be proportional to the size of the structure, and certainly for a very large structure it would mean that there would be a very significant impact to the existing structure in terms of the size and magnitude of the project. I personally had a chance to speak with Brian this evening because he is in attendance here, and he actually believes that that is a reasonable requirement. And so we would like to amend our recommendation on that item this evening to incorporate that addition.
Councilman Gardner?
This is already double the size of what the Orange County Fire Authority recommends, right? I mean, they said 1,000 square feet you should start doing sprinklers. I mean, I'm just looking, I know expense, I mean, obviously we have to be considerate, but I'm also thinking of safety. And when I looked at it, I was thinking, gee, well, we'll never have sprinklers in Corona Del Mar because most of, we're in the most danger of fires because we're the closest together. There's far less danger up on Newport Coast where the houses are farther apart, and yet we're the last ones that'll ever get sprinklers because of the large square footage. Was that a consideration in terms of?
Councilmember Gardner, very much appreciate your comments in that regard. The best way that I can answer that is what really triggered the added thought, I think, between all Orange County cities this time around was the new state provision that requires sprinklers in all new homes. And I think it required the Orange County Fire Authority, it required everyone to take a look at sprinklers. And I think you may have seen in some of the correspondence we provided, cities have, there's a wide variation in terms of how cities approached this requirement in their respective jurisdictions. And of course, we pointed out that there's also a wide variation in the types and character of existing housing that people have and the size of additions. So there is a big variation between cities. The reason that we originally landed upon that Building and Fire originally landed upon a 2,000 square foot number is the thinking that it didn't deviate tremendously from the prior requirements that Newport Beach has historically had, and it was more in line with the square footage potentially of the average size of a new home, so that it might be more consistent with the new code requirements, and further that the size of that type of a proposal for an addition or reconstruction would impact the existing structure, and so that it might be easier or potentially not tremendously expensive for that retrofit.
Was there any consideration given to just doing a percentage? Anytime you add on or rebuild a certain percentage of the house, it triggers this rather than, which would take all neighborhoods into consideration then, rather than just simply the square footage.
That's existing code. The existing code calls for any remodel of under 25% to not require any sprinklers. If the remodel is 25 to 50%, then the remodeled area must be sprinkled. If it's over 50%, then not only the new remodeled, but the entire property must be sprinkled.
That sounds pretty good.
Well, that's the way the code has worked, and I think it has served us well. It's been that way for approximately 5 years now, 6 years. There were many that participated in that. I mean, my thought is that we needed to add a square footage to that would cap that. And so I would amend that to say that if it was 25% or less and under 5,000 square feet, that it wouldn't have to be sprinkled. But if it was between 25 and 50%, less than 5,000 square feet, just the addition, And then if it were 50% or anything over 5,000, the whole structure would have to be sprinkled.
Councilmember Hill, I believe what you just outlined is consistent with the previous requirements we had. The triggering mechanisms in the previous code did have a minimum 5,000 square foot limitation before those provisions kicked in, and I believe that's as you just outlined.
Let me ask before we go too much further, does anyone in council have any problem with anything except the sprinkling provisions? Are there any other provisions that are troublesome to anyone up here? Okay, and the sprinkling provisions are basically similar between the fire code and the building code that's being proposed, right?
Mayor, that is correct, and I would also point out, and I did speak earlier today with the city attorney, should city council determine a different threshold to be appropriate, that could be incorporated into your recommendation of, or determination today of the first reading of the ordinance when we come back at the next meeting with second reading.
Okay. Does anyone on council have further comment regarding Councilman Hill's point of view here about keeping it the way it is?
Well, I really do like the idea of a percentage, because as I say, then it gets to, all neighborhoods get involved. When we get into just flat square footages, it really is an inequity in terms of how neighborhoods are affected. You know, if a house in Corona Del Mar is only a 1,500 square foot house, but it's more than 50% rebuilt, why not have the sprinkler kicked in?
And I might need some clarification based on what Councilmember Hill said, too. I think, as I understand it, the current code is that says that if you're a home above 5,000 square feet, and then, so then it kicks in. Less than 25, you don't do anything. 25 to 50, you do the addition, you sprinkler the addition. More than 50, you do the whole thing. It sounds like what you proposed was to remove that 5,000 square foot threshold, which is similar to what Councilmember Gardner said, and just say, if you're doing less than 25, nothing, regardless of size.
My
And if you're doing
understanding
in
that is the
between-
current code that we've been operating.
I don't think that's the current code. What you said was now to include homes below 5,000 square feet into this three-tier threshold. At least that's what I heard.
Well, let me go through it again.
Okay.
I said that if you are remodeling your home and you are remodeling at less than 25%, you do not have to do anything.
Okay. Any size home.
Regardless of the size of the home.
Right. If you are remodeling any size home from 25 to 50%, then you must sprinkle your remodeled portion.
Okay.
If you are remodeling any size home over 50%, then you must sprinkle old and new.
Okay.
It's my understanding that's the current method that we operate under.
I think I understand it now. I just wanted to confirm from our experts. Is that your understanding of the current, that that's the current code?
No, it is 25%, 50%, and 100%, but that is based on 5,000. So it was 1,250, 2,500, and then 5,000. So you had to add that into the 5,000 square foot home.
Yeah. No, I would like to see it just done by the percentage, but I'd like to get other reactions.
Well, if we did that and you had a 1,200 square foot home and you put a 700 foot addition on it, you'd basically have to tear down your house and redo it to put the sprinklers in. I think that would become really prohibitive to a lot of people who would be affected on the peninsula and in Corona Del Mar in a way that they would not want to be affected.
Yeah, that's true. There's a situation in One Ford Road where all of a sudden the homeowner was faced with $100,000 in cost to essentially have to tear the roof out to put this system in. So I think you got to look at that too.
Well, quite frankly, I just don't see any reason to change the existing code. It's worked for the last, how many years, 5 years?
Which is the over 5,000 square foot.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
adding on that any new home will have to be sprinkled.
Just the way the existing code is. I mean, I haven't seen any compelling information or anything that says that we should change it. It seems to be working, and I just haven't seen anything to convince me we should change it.
Well, I'd like to see us reduce that square footage. I think 5,000 is awfully high.
Just to be clear here, the requirements under the current code would not kick in at all if the size of the home is less than 5,000 square feet. Is that correct? Yes. Okay.
Is that? Well, here, let me ask, under the existing code, maybe one of the building or the fire can answer. In the last 5 years, how many homes that have had additions have had to put sprinklers in the balance of the home? Anybody have a guess?
Don't have that number here. I can tell you that before the last hearing, we did take a look to see the change in the existing requirement going down to just a flat 2,000 square feet, and it would have impacted citywide 6 additional homes over the prior 12 months.
That's 2,000 square feet of the addition.
Correct.
Yeah.
Addition or reconstruction, correct.
Yeah.
So, but what was the size of those 6 homes?
They were all quite large.
I think we still have confusion over existing code, because my understanding was that any home over 5,000 square foot had to be sprinklered. If you didn't build a 5,000 square foot home, you didn't have to sprinkler it. That was new construction.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, if I may offer clarification, under the existing or under the prior codes and amendments, if you have a new house over 5,000 square foot, it has to be sprinkled. Now, if the addition and reconstruction is such that the new overall area, including the addition and reconstruction, would end up being over 5,000, then the entire home has to be sprinkled. And the way it was structured is that if the addition is less than 25% of the existing structure, then no sprinkler requirement. If the addition and reconstruction is between 25% and 50% of the existing structure, and overall is kicked over 5,000, then the entire house has to be retrofitted. If I may offer some additional explanation for the proposed amendment, the percentage was taken into consideration, but it's part of that 2,000 square foot. 2,000 square foot is 50% of a 4,000 square foot home. So it was already being factored in that 2,000 square foot. Now, the 2,000 square foot is really we took into consideration that because we did not want to impact the smaller homes and smaller additions. So, for example, the 1,500 square foot home, that's adding 700 square foot, then indeed, although it's a small house and sprinklering would not cost as much as sprinkling a big house, in proportion to that existing house and cost of construction, it would be significant. So we took that as the threshold to really relieve those small homes and small projects, additions, and reconstruction from the requirement. However, it was pointed out to our attention by Mr. Jeanette that indeed, although we don't get very many of these big homes, and we get a few, but not very many, that would propose an addition of 2,000 square foot or more, that we need to also protect these big homes from having to be torn into in case they were essentially adding 2,000 square foot and not intending on the remodel of the existing home. And I want to just clarify that this is not applicable to remodels. They could remodel all they want. This is addition and reconstruction. So we do not want to confuse that with the remodel of an existing home.
Well, wait. Make that distinction for me again.
Yes.
A remodel and, I know the difference between a remodel to a house, but a remodel and a reconstruction?
Yes, let me explain that, and we have a slide that we can essentially show if you like. For example, if you have, say, even a 4,000 square foot home, you could essentially do an interior remodel of the entire house, and a sprinkler is not triggered. However, if you have a 4,000 square foot home, for example, and you go ahead and demolish 1,000, reconstruct that 1,000 and another 1,000, which will be now an addition of 2,000, So that's reconstruction and addition of 2,000. But we wouldn't go back and say, well, you're remodeling also a portion of the existing house to remain. That is not part of this formula.
Would it be safe to say that what the staff is proposing in the staff report here, the revised proposal, is sort of halfway, or somewhere between what Councilman Gardner's proposing and what Councilman Selich is proposing?
Well, what Councilwoman Gardner is proposing really would be more restrictive, because now if we go percentages only, you could have the example of
Right. She's being more restrictive, and he's being less restrictive than what you're proposing. Is that accurate?
Yes, indeed. Now, what we are proposing, the 2,000 square foot, is 50% of a 4,000 square foot home.
He's talking about 5,000 square
Yes,
feet.
and the justification for that is the new California Residential Code, which is new. On a national scale, it's required that any new house is sprinklered. So that's where really the justification for setting a little bit lower cap than the old 5,000 square foot. We lowered to 4,000 essentially.
How's that defined? Is it be like the Coastal Commission, if you leave up your chimney, it's not a new house and you don't have to sprinkle, or is it really, I mean?
Well, that will be remedied by the amendment that we have in front of you. Because if under the new code, only new construction is required to be sprinklered, and indeed then there will be that loophole. Somebody could do a varying amount of demolition and leave in, then you'd have to define what is new construction. And that would be a difficult one to define.
Could staff read what they have recommended again? I don't think we have it in front of us.
And we apologize for that, Councilmember Hill. Literally, we were finalizing that as late as during this meeting. But our recommendation, our previous recommendation, just had a flat square footage of 2,000 square feet for an addition or reconstruction that triggered the sprinkler requirement. And we're proposing that it be 2,000 square feet and 50% or greater in terms of square footage size of the existing structure.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember.
It seems to me that the revised staff recommendation represents a concept that's been vetted and approved through the BIA, that Mr. Jeanette's had an opportunity, who's as familiar with our building characteristics of the city. Has anybody in town has had an opportunity to input on, and that input's been received? It's reflected some of the advice that you received from the council during the course of the hearings that we've had on this. Frankly, I'm getting confused about what we used to have, what we may have, what we couldn't have, what they have nationally and all that. But it sounds to me like we're getting to a strategy that's probably pretty good. So I think I'm becoming more and more convinced that the staff recommendation may be the way to go here.
Yeah, at this point, I'm willing to make a motion that we accept the staff's recommendation.
Second.
All right, we would like to accept public comment on this issue. Does anyone in the public care to comment?
Mayor Hand, members of the council, I'm Brian Jeanette. Excuse me. Great dialogue, and it is confusing. And I think the hard part is trying to understand some of the projects that we deal with, which I'm dealing with one right now in Balboa Island, where there's a 3,500 square foot house. We're adding another half to it. We're sprinkling the whole building. Fortunately, the changes of the interiors said that was okay. We wove it into the process, but it was very expensive. That's the thing that I'm trying to keep a lid on, because I think that's very onerous to the property owners. My first and best position is to stay, as Councilman Hill had mentioned, leave the existing ordinance as it is, which is to maintain the 25, 50%, and over 50% you sprinkle the whole building concept. So from that standpoint, that would be my first position. As a discussion with Faisal and I had earlier, I think the 2,000 square foot limitation and what staff is proposing now does have a lot of merit. And I think, to Councilman Gardner's point, any new building should be sprinklered, as far as I'm concerned. And it's easy to weave it in. It's not that expensive. roughly you can look at $1.50 to $2, or about $1.50 a square foot to do that. A retrofit will go to about $6 a square foot to do that. So you have a huge disparity. In summation, I think what Joel has come up with and the staff has come up with, I believe that does establish an equitable place to be for the city and still keep the percentages that do make a lot of sense. Hopefully that didn't confuse anybody.
So you support our motion, or my motion?
I do support the motion,
Very good.
yes.
Thank you.
Well, there's one caveat that I would add, and I think it is important to put it in this part of the code. There's a provision of the code that allows for building official amendments to these things, because the circumstances we may be talking about today may vary yet. It's called alternate means and methods. And I think it's important to put something like that in this provision so that if somebody has a project that's more complicated than we can consider at this point, it's expressly given to the applicant to go to the building official and say, I got something that's different than you discussed. Let's look at those alternate means in order to gain the higher fire resistance to the building and make it an easy opportunity to exercise that right. It's a very simple thing that is often done, but a lot of people don't know about this portion of the code.
Mayor and City Council members, staff would have no problem with language like that being incorporated as well.
If I could ask for a mathematical clarification. So I have to sprinkle my entire home if I'm doing a remodeling addition to it, and it's over 2,000 square feet, up to the fact that my house is 4,000 square feet in size. If my house is over 4,000 square feet in size, then the trigger is 50%. All right, that I could accept.
Yeah.
All right, I'll amend my motion to
Alternative means and methods.
include the alternative means and methods approach.
Thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any other public comment on this item?
Keith, you made your second?
I agree. Seeing none, back to council for any further comment and a vote. Let's vote.
So the vote would be on the introduction of both ordinances in item 25 and 26, correct me if I'm wrong?
With the similar
those
provisions
effective
as
changes.
moved.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Motions for reconsideration. Madam Clerk.
Actually, Mayor, it's public comments. Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record.
I'm sorry, Bill, I almost cut you out there. Thanks for...
Well, W.R. Dilding, you did cut me off.
I know.
What about the building codes? All you adopted was a fire code.
We adopted both in the same motion.
Okay, I'll get hold of the Standards Commission. Thank you.
Was there some, did we?
I thought we were fairly clear that we were adopting both items. I don't know.
No, I thought that we had said we were going to discuss both items and vote on each separately.
And then I clarified right before your vote that you were going to be voting on both ordinances. So if you wanted to undo that, I imagine.
I do think that it would be easy to have missed that, so.
Okay.
Well, look, Bill sat down here for this whole
Yeah.
time, so let's just consider the first vote to have been on the fire code and ask Bill to make his comments. Is anybody troubled by that?
In New York, we used to call this a do-over.
Yeah. Mr. Dildine, it is now time for public comment on the building code ordinance that's up for...
I was waiting for presentation slides and wanted a couple of comments. Number one, on the Green Building Standards Code, nobody around, none of the other municipalities have made any amendments. Okay. Now, on the slide and the ordinance, there are mistake in values, which is correct. On page, I guess you don't have, on the air filters. I thought in state law it said MERV was 6, it's going to be changed to 7. On your slide, it goes from 7 to 8. The big point here is the electrical code, the mechanical code, and the plumbing code, the state mandated no changes. Now, the makeup, this is the first time I believe the city of Newport has adopted the Green Building Standards Code. I had read in the paper there was a city task force on green construction. I was never aware that they were going to be discussing code issues. These issues presented to you are from that committee. Yes. Okay? I think 90% of this, of the people that are building today, residential, want all energy standard. But this is forcing it on them. The other question I had, or concern I had, a dishwasher may not exceed 5.8 gallons per cycle. What happens if somebody wants a commercial dishwasher in the house to go with their commercial range and their commercial refrigerator? Yet there is no standard been set for what commercial dishwashers can consume. I feel that all this responsibility at this time should be upon the design professional putting it on his plans, sitting down with his customer and asking him, this is what I recommend. It's going to pay for itself. There's no and if buts about it. In reference to the elevator situation, having practiced electrical engineering, anything in a commercial building today, I'm sure in your new city hall, the engineers have sat down and are making it as efficient as possible, because that is what's there. The other thing that troubles me here is in non-residential standards recommended by task force, control stormwater runoff quality and quantity and quality. It says reinstatement of city requirement. Isn't that in the code already someplace else? If it is, why can't we just, for this next 3 years, adopt this Green Building Standards Code the way it is? I see problems with suppliers delivering material to Costa Mesa that can't be, faucets and whatnot, that can't be used in Newport Beach. To me, yes, I want to save water, I want to save electricity, I want to save natural gas. At the same time, I can see more problems for the building department inspecting these things because these labels are on the back. Let the design professionals put it on their back for inspection.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Is that it, Bill? Do we have a response to those comments?
Well, I just would like to say, as far as the Green Building Task Force, it was made up of a number of several architects, and also the BIA representative sat with us, and he wasn't on the committee himself, but he appeared at each meeting, and the BIA, the Orange County branch, signed off on our recommendation.
May I make one other real quick comment?
Sure.
The history of this city. Prior to the mid-'60s, in the electrical business, we had 2 codes. The Orange Empire Electrical Code, which many of the cities adopted and whatnot, and this was your Newport Beach Electrical Code. Better codes, personally, than what are required today for residential, except Newport Beach had one little gimmick. We had to use compression fittings when we ran exposed conduit in garages. In yours truly, I had more correction notices in my career in the city of Newport Beach because I would think I was up in Orange or Santa Ana and come down here, but that's the way the codes, and that's why the standardization efforts have taken place after the lawsuit against the city of Newport Beach back in the 60s. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Do we have a comment on that?
We do, members of the City Council. The items that are being addressed, I believe, relate to the items that are on page 3 of your staff report. And they are items that were recommended by the task force, as mentioned by Councilmember Gardner. And there were 4 provisions for residential standards and 5 provisions for residential standards. And as Bill mentioned, one of those non-residential standards is covered in additional code. It's not problematic that it would be incorporated here, but it is repetitive of another code provision. but staff carried forward the recommendations from the task force and our recommendations to City Council. I would add, though, it certainly is our intention, certainly is staff's intention on the building side to implement those provisions along with all of the other green standards provisions that are new for all cities throughout California in the easiest and most expeditious way that is practical and possible here.
I move the action.
Do we have a second? And
I apologize. Just a quick check with staff, something Bill mentioned. On page 41, it looks like the amendment speaks to filters with higher value than MERV 7, yet our chart says MERV 8. I don't want this to have to come back. So the chart on 3 says MERV 8, the number on page 41 says 7.
The way it's phrased in the
Higher than
amendment,
7. Okay.
higher than 7, so that.
All right, and to clarify your motion is to approve the building code changes inclusive of the new language on the sprinklers, as approved in the fire code change. Okay. Do we have any further discussion? Then let's vote.
Motion carries
Now-
unanimously.
Now we get to go to public comment on non-agenda items. Do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none, can I have motion for reconsideration?
A motion to reconsider the vote on any action taken by the city council at either this meeting or the previous meeting may be made only by one of the council members who voted with the prevailing side.
Do I hear any motions for reconsideration? No. Therefore, we are adjourned.
We elect a new mayor, we'll have